out before Kira could begin to stand and walk over to him. For the next 2 days, the same thing happened. Kira was always one step behind and couldn't trap Tristan alone for the 2 minutes she needed to get her point across. On Wednesday, after her third try at chasing him down, Kira pulled Emma aside at the end of the day and sat down with her on one of the outside of the sofa to get some advice. "Can I give you the short version of my weekend?" Kira asked once they settle a Kel 00. "This sounds juicy," Emma said, and Kira noticed that she seemed very excited for some gossip to live vicariously through. "Okay, well, on Saturday I went to Charleston to start working on my history paper, just like I told you all in the cafeterum. I didn't mention was that I ran into Tristan. We snuck into a church steeple and ended up making out for a while." Kira finished quickly and let out the breath she had been holding. She peered at Emma carefully, hoping to see no judgment coming from her friend's eyes. "Hoa, I was not expecting that way to go, Kira." Emma put her hand out for a discreet low five, and Kira happily slapped her hand down. "Now back up, give me a little more detail and tell me what the heck the problem is." "I basically ran into him early in the day, and then he said he would be my tour guide and show me all the Charleston hotspots. We ended up having a great time, and Tristan told me he wanted to show me his favorite place in the city, which happened to be the top of Church Steeple, so we snuck up. We ended up talking, which turned into fighting, and fighting turned into kissing, and kissing turned into Tristan freaking out, running away and abandoning me in the church." Kira sighed and thought about how much to reveal about why Tristan ran away. She could tell Emma was trying to wait patiently, but her foot was tapping against the sidewalk with enthusiasm at the new turn of events. "I'm not completely sure why he left, but I think it has something to do with his friends. And now at school he's avoiding me. I know I need to catch him alone, which is where you come in." Kira looked at Emma. "Hopil 11 why she need to plan and fast, and the only class you have together is English, right?" Kira nodded. "With Luke." Kira nodded again. "I'm going to need to do some thinking for a minute, a little scheming time." Now it was Kira's turn to try and wait patiently while Emma sat with a brow and her chin resting on her hand. Kira out at the parking lot, which had completely emptied during their conversation, and she was grateful to not have to worry about eavesdroppers. The last thing she needed was to be the talk of the school and to let her secret afternoon become public knowledge. Kira ran her sweaty palms down the length of her pants, trying to calm herself. "I have it." Emma's entire face brightened as she turned to Kira with a gleam in her eye. Kira was instantly overjoyed to have Emma on her side, especially when she's so mischievous. "Today, in my English class, we got into groups of 2 to read lines from Romeo and Juliet, something about how hearing it gives it more meaning or whatever. Anyway, you'll only have about 5 or so minutes, but if you can trap Tristan and force him to be your partner, it might give you the time you need." "Emma, you're a genius." Kira grabbed the girl's shoulders, shaking them with glee. "I totally forgot when Mr. Bell made that announcement at the end of class." "Too distracted by your lover?" Emma asked with a teasing grin. Kira tried to laugh it off, but the caught in the act look was all over her face. "Seriously though, I need some details. Was he a good kisser?" Kira had a quick flashback to being back up against the wall in his arms. "Yes," she said while biting her lip to keep from smiling too widely. "Can I get some more details on that, please? A little play-by-play maybe? I can promise you, every girl in the school wishes she was in my shoes right now, well, more likely yours, but still." Kira laughed and started giving up some of the more intimate details, the romance of the location and how they were yelling one moment then caught up in it the next. Emma hung on her every word and sighed romantically at the appropriate moments. It was the 10 minutes to Kira, who had thinking many deep thoughts recently. She just wished she had thought to supply some chocolate or peanut butter. One thing was certain though, next time she needed to watch romantic movies like The Notebook, Emma would definitely be the one to call. She needed another person besides her mother who could appreciate the "I want to cry, this is so heartbreakingly romantic" sort of movie. Eventually, Kira drove away from the and found her way back home, just in time to make dinner. She sat her little sister on the counter as she prepared the chicken piccata and heard all about S Day with her imaginary friend Beth. Sometimes Kira wished she was still in those days of make-believe, but despite how the past weeks had been, she knew she was on the verge of figuring it all out. She just needed a bit more patience. The next day, all Kira could think about was how to put her plan into action. She barely spoke to her friends at lunch and was silent during her walk to English with Luke. Just as they were about to come into the classroom, she stopped moving. "Hey Luke!" He turned when he heard her speak. "I forgot something in my locker, I'll meet you inside." He nodded and continued into the classroom. She tried to evoke at a normal pace, but quickly sped to her hiding spot and peered around the corner of a locker to keep a lookout on the classroom door. For a moment she was worried that Tristan would the one to sneak up on her, but Kira soon saw Mr. Bell enter the classroom and Tristan was close behind. After he disappeared inside, Kira made her way to the door, hoping that an open seat was left next to Tristan and that all of this planning wasn't for nothing. She saw Luke at the front of the classroom with an open seat next to him and Tristan 2 feet from her next to the other open seat. She flashed an apologetic at Luke and sat down, trying to look guilty at being late instead of smug at having everything go smoothly. Tristan didn't glance at her, but she thought she saw his arm muscles tighten in anger when she sat down a few inches from him. Kira tried to act innocent and pulled out paper to jot down some notes during the first half of class. Really, she was losing all of her patience waiting for Mr. Bell to end the lecture and start with the acting lessons. If he didn't do it soon, she knew her chance to trap Tristan for a few minutes would be lost. She couldn't really pull the "I left something in my locker" act again. Kira knew Luke would be suspicious. Finally, Mr. Bell walked down the aisles assigning pairs and Kira let out a silent breath of relief when she and Tristan were together. "Okay everyone, now that we've finished reading the play, I want you all to practice reading Shakespeare out loud." He was a playwright after all, his words were meant to be spoken. "I think the balcony scene will do since I paired you all in groups. You aerial hormonal teenagers, right?" The class responded with a laugh and everyone opened their books to Act 2, Scene 2. Tristan turned to Kira with what she could only call a look, and tried his best to read some of the most romantic lines ever written in a completely melancholic voice. "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east and Juliet is the sum. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who is already sick and pale with grief that thou her maid art far more fair than she." Kira couldn't help but laugh at him as he speedily grumbled out the lines without even an ounce of passion. "You know this is supposed to be a love scene, right?" He looked up at her with contempt while she tried to swallow her smile. "Oh, really? I hadn't noticed." He looked back down at the page and continued to read aloud in his monotone voice, totally ignoring her, which just prompted her to look. "Tristan, there's no point hiding the fact that you like me, from me. I flipped through your notebook again after I saw that you, left it behind. I saw the drawings you made of me." He up at her then, and Kira handed his small moleskin back to him, happy to at least have that out of the way. For some reason, she thought he was looking at her like she was an unruly child who wouldn't follow instructions. Where he got that from, she had no idea, but he continued with his speech, so she continued talking over him. "They were really great actually, pretty flattering." She smiled, hoping he would at her again, but he didn't. "Anyway, I think we should talk about what happened, not here obviously, but somewhere where we can meet in private." They both chose that moment to look around, and Kira saw they had the attention of both Luke and Tristan's friends. Yeah, she thought, the classroom was definitely not the right place to have this conversation, and she kind of hoped talking would lead to other things like it had last he finished reading his lines. "Hey Juliet, it's your turn." He smirked. "Oh, right." She looked down at her book. "Oh Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" She tried to copy his apathetic style of reading and was secretly overjoyed when he at her "I get it, I sound like an idiot." She just continued on, giving him the same silent treatment he had given her. "Okay, here's the TMTH we can't talk here and we shouldn't even be talking now or maybe ever. You told me that already." She stopped reading. "Yet, you seem to have trouble understanding it. English is your first language, right?" She rolled her eyes at the joke. "Like I said before, we just can't ever. I understand what you're saying, but I also know you don't mean it." She leaned closer to him to prevent being overheard. "I do," he forced the "oh really." She tried to push him now. "It didn't seem that way when you kissed Kira. Forget that ever happened, okay? Or what? You don't scare me." "I should," he said and shot Kira a lethal look. His eyes changed color to the lightest blue she could imagine and they held her captive, not in the romantic way, but as though she were a prisoner held paralyzed. His eyes were cold and made her shiver like she had been dropped in an Arctic, and slowly his pupils began to expand, overtaking his eyeballs. Kira was scared, and more than that, she felt like he knew it and didn't care. Her fear at not being able to move was slowly surpassed by a swell of power that stiffed within her as a feeling of warmth spread to her hands. Kira broke free from him and looked at the floor. Her fingertips still tingled with whatever had coursed through her and allowed her to break his gaze. Kira leaned back against her chair and away from him. She touched her fingers to her cheek and felt them bum into her skin. "Ivy, what the hell was that?" she asked unsteadily, still not looking up. The heat emanating from her hand absorbed all of Kira's thoughts. "Me," he said with the venom gone from his voice. She looked at him again and caught the unbearably sad expression in his eyes before he looked away from her. "Or me?" she thought to herself, feeling the heat finally ebb. Rewriting Shakespeare, are we? Mr_Bell walked between them and Kira couldn't help but let a guilty cross her face. They most certainly had not been following the assignment, but she wanted to hug Mr. Bell for breaking the silence and pausing her thoughts. "Tristan, you seem to a hard time following the rules." Tristan looked at Mr. Bell defiantly, and Kira felt a little sorry that she had caused the whole thing. What were you and Mrs. Dawson talking about so passionately?" "It definitely was not." "And Juliet, screw you," Tristan replied, and Kira heard every student in the inhale in shock. She couldn't tell if he said it just to be defiant or to hide their conversation from his friends. "Well, Mr. Kent," Tristan looked up at the use of his last narn _ "perhaps you and Miss Dawson would like to show everyone how it's done." Tomb scene. Front of the class. "Now." Kira and practically pulled Tristan from his seat to stop him from getting both of them punished with extra homework. As they walked towards the front of the class, he whispered to her, "Think you can be quiet and play dead for a few minutes?" When they reached the front, she turned to face him and, with his body hiding her face from the rest of the class, said defiantly, "Think you can pretend to not enjoy kissing me for your friends? Think you can for Luke?" He smirked and moved aside. "Damn him," she thought, "he always has to the last word." "You can start with Romeo's monologue," Mr_Bell prodded, and Tristan began to read. Kira listened intently for the cue that meant he would lean down to give her a quick kiss in front of the. As she listened, she realized he was much better at reading than he let on. His voice was full of passion as he paused at the appropriate moments and rushed through some lines as though the words were his. Kira lay still on the front table with closed eyes, but was sure he had captivated the entire classroom as he read Romeo's lines, and she felt herself fall for him a little bit more the longer he spoke. "Eyes, look your last." She felt his gaze even through closed lids. Arms, take your last embrace. His body gently settled on top of her own. He seemed to speak only into her ear. And lips, he whispered and ran his thumb along the of her lower lip, something the script definitely didn't call for. Oh, you the doors of breath, seal with a righteous kiss, a dateless bargain to engrossing death. He lifted himself off of her to continue reading. Kira heard him utter the last few lines and the swish of his clothes as he lifted his arm to swallow invisible poison. "OTME, thy drugs are quick," he spoke, a stalled voice. She felt his hands fall on either side of her face and heard the desk creak as he leaned slowly down until she knew from the brush of warm air that his lips were an inch from her. Thus, with a kiss I'd die. For what seemed like a millennium, Kira laid still, waiting, until finally, in the softest kiss she could ever imagine, his lips landed on her 0vn and remained there for a few longer than they should have. Her lips curled into a smile and she felt his do the same. Unfortunately, he then pretended to fall off the desk and die. Kira thought, listening to the engrossed silence of the class, how the heck am I supposed to follow that? Nair. Belle spoke for the other characters, until she knew it was her time to wake. Kira opened her eyes slowly and sat up to speak her lines to the friar. She tried to appropriately chuckle when she was told of Romeo's death, but heard some people snicker at her failed attempt. And just when Kira was supposed to her own monologue, the bell thankfully rang and saved her from the embarrassing excurrence. Kira down at Tristan and almost believed him dead, until he jumped up, winked at her and fled from the classroom. Kira sat for a moment longer, trying to guess at who came out of that exchange with the upper hand and wondering if Tristan would agree to talk things over in private. More importantly, she felt her OUTL check, trying to recall the overwhelming warmth that spread from her hand to that very spot. Kira had no idea what had happened, and she didn't know who to ask for answers. Kira sighed, lifted herself from her seated position on the makeshift tomb, and walked over to gather her THMGS_. When she left the classroom, Luke was waiting for her. So that was interesting, he said, and fell in step with her with shoulders and hands in his jeans pockets. Kira remained silent. I thought you were captivating as Juliet. Great idea to put a hand to your chest then forehead and pretend to faint when you saw Romeo had died. Classic Mo. Kira smiled and shoved him away from her for making on. I'm not an actress and I never said I was, she said in her defense. Trust me, I know. Luke journeyed away from the shove he had already anticipated. Want to talk about it? What? She tried to hide the frown on her face, and pulled her purple sweater tighter around her torso. Whatever it was you and Tristan got in trouble for fighting about. Kira knew it hurt Luke that she was starting to keep secrets from him, and that there might be something she would rather talk to Tristan about. I was just thanking him for saving me in that accident. I never really got the chance before. Kira wanted to let Luke know the truth, but knew she couldn't, no matter how much she hated to shut him out. He had been there as her friend since she walked through the doors of the school a month ago, and she really didn't want to hunt him. For a moment, Kira had thought she would tell him Tristan, but she remembered Bethany and knew Luke would never understand. He was too emotionally to put himself in her shoes. I bet he didn't want to hear any of it. Kira shrugged. Something like that. Cheer up. Luke put an arm around her. Want to skip class and buy some ice cream? You wouldn't mind playing hooky for the rest of the day. She smiled at the mischievous look in his eye. And how are we supposed to do that? She asked, knowing the campus security would definitely 2 students ditch class. Follow me you must, young Padawan, Luke said, quoting Star Wars and attempting to use a Yoda voice. He stalled running down the hallway, and she ran after, knowing they were already late to class and had nothing left to lose. He stopped at the hallway intersection in front of the main exit and peered around the corner. Out of nowhere, Kira saw Luke produce a straw and a small rolled-up piece of paper to send the most perfect spitball she had ever seen, well, the only spitball she had ever seen, into the head of a security guard down the hall. She covered her mouth to stop from laughing as Luke sailed another one into his head. The security guard spun around angrily, and Kira and Luke snuck into an open janitor's closet. They heard the guard's heavy steps as he ran down one hall, paused and made a wrong turn down the hallway leading away from them. Go, go, go! Luke pushed her out of the closet and they ran for the door. Once they made it through the exit, Kira forced Luke to keep running and she bit back her own laughter until they made it to the parking lot. Ice cream, my lady. Luke pretended to bow and offer his arm. Kira accepted. They marched arm in arm over to his car and sat down safely inside before erupting into a fit of laughter that only stopped when they both had tears streaming down their cheeks. Luke revved the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. They left the school completely behind them. Kira couldn't think of a more perfect ending to the day, or of a more friend for that matter. She smiled to herself, glanced at Luke when she caught him looking at her, and turned up the music to take on lead. Chapter 6. A week later, Kira opened her looker to see a portrait of herself leaning up against her textbooks. She grabbed the small paper that held a close-up of her face with a dusting of light curls around the edges and knew it was a message from Tristan. She turned the paper over and saw a note scribbled in cursive on the back. Met me in the auditorium at lunchtime. She noticed he didn't even sign his name, like he knew she had been waiting for a sign from him. She of course had waiting, but still, the arrogance of assuming he was the only guy who would leave her a note. Kira didn't care though, because just like in Charleston, Tristan had been the one to break the silence, which meant he really couldn't resist her either. That Emma had snuck behind Kira without her noticing. Kira turned, clutching at her chest. Lord, you just gave me a heart attack. Sorry, Emma said without really meaning it as she tried to peer closer at the paper Kira had quickly stuffed inside her binder. She didn't want to share Tristan's drawing, but she would definitely tell Emma what it said. Let's just say our little scheme worked and I won't be at lunch today. Kira tried to play it cool and not give away how excited she was. 00, scandalous. Was that a love note? Emma looked dreary-eyed. I don't know, but I'm willing to try and find out, Kira said before slamming her locker closed and following Emma to class, where the gossip was quickly overtaken by the to pay attention to their teacher's lecture on differential equations. When lunch rolled around, Kira dodged the crowd and went in the opposite towards the auditorium on the complete other side of the school. She arrived before Tristan and walked past the rows of chairs up towards the stage where the set for the Denver musical W71 Christmas was being prepared. Her school in New York only allowed secular performances, and she did kind of like that, got into the Christmas spirit here. Of course, it was the middle of October, so really only the drama crew had reached the point of singing Christmas carols, but she could anticipate how crazy would be right after Thanksgiving. A half-painted Christmas tree surrounded by cut-out-like presents, but not decorated, in the middle of the stage. There was a piano in the corner and a costume rack held 40s-style dresses and suits for the actors. Kira scrambled on stage and ivoked around the yards of fake pine and tinsel that already covered it. Mistletoe. She heard Tristan behind her. She turned in time to see him jump deftly on the stage. I hadn't noticed. Kira tried to play it. Tristan pulled a strand of green plastic leaves from his with a smirk. I knew there had to be a reason you to meet here. But you'll have to catch me first. Kira teased and started backing away. His smirk turned into the half-smile she loved and a little dimple sprouted on his cheek. Tristan strode confidently forward, and when he got a little closer, Kira jumped behind the fake tree and used it as a defensive wall, moving left when he did and right when he did. She laughed when his frustration grew and out from behind the tree to try to leap off the stage, moving the chase into different territory. But, strong arms around her waist, lifted her off the ground, and swung her around in circles. "You're mine now," he whispered into her ear, and Kira couldn't decide if the shiver that raced down her back was full of excitement or fear. He let her feet drop to the ground and she turned in the circle of his arms. "Changed your mind about that? We can never be nonsense." She smiled in victory. "Not completely, but you are doing a great job convincing me." Tristan lifted the corner of his mouth again and she laid her hand on his cheek, capturing the dimple in her palm, before sliding it up into his hair to push his ebony bangs back so she could see his eyes better. "You have to tell me something first." Tristan looking at her with concern and she almost thought a hint of dread. Kira bit her lip, thinking how to phrase her question. "% at Hapinal when you at me before, in class I mean? I swear I couldn't move and then something happened to me I didn't understand. And I know you know." She held his face still, making sure he didn't look away from her to hide his secrets. Tristan hesitated for a moment. His face was frozen in a grimace, the expression of someone with nowhere left to none. "I do know." He sighed, and Kira thought it sounded as though a weight that had been holding him in place had suddenly been lifted free. "There's something about me." "About who? Know what I am that you need to know, and Luke will have to fill you in on the rest. I'm so tired of hiding, Kira." She could read the anguish written all over his face and she let her hand fall to his chest, to his heart, trying to give him some comfort in what he was going to admit. Tristan talking, and they both turned to the sound of clapping that was coming from the back row of the auditorium. Diana, John and Jerome sat with grins on their faces and stood when Kira and Tristan finally noticed them. They strode down the aisle, slowly with complete confidence, clapping at a leisurely pace and staring only at Tristan. Kira was scared. She didn't understand what was going on or the more than venomous looks on his friends' faces. "Well done, Tristan. You had even me believing that performance." Diana gracefully on stage in one smooth motion that shocked Kira. Jerome and John stopped clapping and followed suit. "Don't listen to a word they say, and please stay behind me," Tristan to Kira as he tumbled around to face his friends. "This isn't what it seems," he told his friends in a confident voice. Kira hoped he wasn't faking. "And what is it?" Jerome's deep voice seemed to reverberate off the walls. "I brought her here to talk, and that's it." Tristan angled himself in front of Kira, as his friends seemed to close in on them. "To talk? And what, if I may ask, do you why have to talk?" Diana sneered and walked closer to Tristan, stopping just barely a foot away from him. John and Jerome came up beside her, and Kira heard she was forgotten as they continued to stare at Tristan. "You may not ask," Tristan replied coldly. "Then I demand," Diana hissed. Kira saw Tristan tense in front of her and a few seconds of strained silence passed before he started laughing very obviously in Diana's face. Kira thought he had gone mad. Surely there was nothing funny about this situation, and she watched as his friends' faces darkened with anger. Demand? "Diana, you get ahead of yourself. You know you can't threaten me." Tristan used his height to look down at her, proving his dominance. "Maybe I can't alone, but even you can't take on 3 to 1 odds." Diana angled herself back, so she, Jerome and John looked like one solid, impenetrable wall. Kira watched as John and Jerome shuffled on their feet, getting ready to move at a second's notice. It wouldn't become a fight. She had no idea Tristan's friends would react so harshly to seeing them together. For a moment, she wondered if she had done the right thing in trying to pursue him. Maybe it would have been better for him to draw her in secret and for her move on, never knowing or wondering what could have been. But, Kira knew it was late for those thoughts. The fight she expected didn't start. Instead, John placed his hand on Diana's shoulder. "Perhaps we should let him explain," he questioned, relieving some tension. Diana nodded, not breaking her gaze. "Can you explain, Tristan?" Why are you here with this girl Ivy? And we said you all'd kill her together or not at all. When we said we would wait and watch to see how much she knew. Kill? Kira sucked in her breath. They thought he meant to kill her? They all had planned to kill her? I was greedy, I admit. Tristan began, and Kira could hardly believe her ears. He couldn't meant to kill her. They had met here because he wanted to be her, or that's what she thought at least. Kira backed up a few feet, away from him. After all, how much did she really know about Tristan? Ivy had if he had fooling her all along, fooling her into falling for him so she would be easier to catch? But, why did he even want to catch her or to maybe kill her? None of it made any sense. Tristan started speaking again, and Kira tried to shut her question me mind down to listen. I want the power for myself, and for that I apologize. Let's go and forget this happened. Let us go to a different town, one not swarming with condits to confset us and place us against each other. Condits? Kira thought, what were condits and why would they try to split Tristan from his friends? And what power? Kira at Diana and saw one very prominently raised eyebrow, displaying her doubt. The black-haired beauty didn't believe Tristan's story. But, Kira noticed, it wasn't the killing or the condits she questioned, but Tristan's belief in his outl orts underscore. For the first time since moving to Charleston, Kira wasn't sure if she wanted all of her answers, especially to the question of Tristan's real intent. She couldn't believe the kiss had a lie, but what if he was just a very good actor? She had heard it in his voice during class. He could play the part of Romeo very well, so why not that of Seducer? Tristan. Kira couldn't help herself, she had to ask, to know what was happening. She was scared of his friends and maybe of him. She needed reassurance that she would be safe. Him. Tristan looked back at her, silently begged her to be quiet, and Kira instantly knew she had made a mistake. All eyes turned in her direction and Kira saw hunger written in their faces. She watched the transformation as all of their eyes, even Tristan's, turned to a crystal blue. Their pupils expanded and their top lips began to puff. It was the same look as Tristan's had been back in the classroom, but now Kira understood his was meant to keep her away and this look was meant to kill. Fear raced through her veins. She had never felt so much like prey. Time seemed to stop as Diana another step closer to Tristan without taking her eyes from Kira. If you came here to kill, by all means, take the first bite. Diana leaned over and in Tristan's ear while running her hand down his arm. Tristan closed his eyes slowly and Kira read the pain there. She had ruined Ivy had ever control over the situation he had had. Despite his best effort, Kira saw a trace of hunger even in his expression and she wondered just how much control Tristan had lost, not only over his friends but also over himself. Diana, John and Jerome all stared at Tristan, waiting for him to move towards her. They hunched over on there as if ready to pounce and she saw the hunger for the fight in their eyes. It was a challenge, that much was obvious. It was also obvious that Tristan was losing. Kira couldn't process anything fast enough, killing and biting and condits. She felt she was on stage in a play but had forgotten all of her lines. She backed away because her gut told her to go, but she couldn't go far. Her heart told her not to leave him. Tristan mouthed to her, and at first she didn't see what he said, but after a second time Kira made out one word, rum. The next instant, Tristan turned and used both of his hands to shove all of his weight and strength into Diana's stomach. Kira gasped as the other girl flew through the air, landed in the seats below the stage and stood after a C&D without a scratch. Diana journeyed impossibly far and, in one leap, was back onto the stage to face Tristan. Tristan wasn't waiting for her though. Kira tried to follow his movements but could only see Jerome fly into the stage curtain and John slam into the wall, causing the brick to crack apart. By the time Diana had returned from her initial punch, only seconds had passed, but Kira saw Tristan wind up and punch her in the face, sending Diana towards the back of the room again. To her right, Jerome tore through the coltane and re-emerged with death in his icy blue eyes. He charged Tristan, only to picked up and shoved head first through the stage floor, creating a hole in the H.WOD_. Jerome reached his hands beside the hole and pushed his head from the floor. Instead of a mess, Kira saw Jerome untouchable by the landing. She was frozen. Kira had known Tristan had secrets, but watching him now made her realize she never should have tried to uncover them. He wasn't human, none of them could be. Vibrations numbled through her as their bodies slammed into the walls and the ground, causing the entire auditorium to shake from its very foundations. Not wanting to attract attention, she continued to watch as Tristan stood like a titan throwing his friends around as though they were dolls. She saw the building start to fissure with the force, saw dense ivy hear their bodies smacked, and she slowly back away while their attentions were on each other rather than her. When Kira reached the backstage, she tried to slowly turn her body to face away from the battle and she for the door handle. Kira knew it was her only chance to get away and get Luke. She was sure he understood what was happening and that this was the gruesome revelation he had warning her about. If she didn't now, Kira wasn't certain she would be able to escape with her life. She finally found the door handle. But just as she slipped her hand around its contours, a blick hit her in the leg, slammed her into the wall and almost knocked her unconscious. Kira fell to the ground and there was silence. All four of the misfits stared at her. She felt her thigh, felt the warm liquid seeping from a newly formed cut in her leg, and met Tristan's eye. Now his hunger was obvious. The sliver of his iris that was still visible seemed to glow blue, and Kira wondered what horror story she had just a part of. With Tristan still under the spell of his own events, his friends jumped him. Jerome and John grabbed his arms, twisting them and breaking each one before pulling them securely behind his back. Kira tried to stand and mn away now that she couldn't hide, but Diana got to her impossibly fast and pulled Kira's hair to stop her. Kira screamed at the pain and Tristan jolted awake, struggling to escape his friends and ignoring the pain from his crooked arms. "Not so fast," Diana said into Kira's ear as she dragged her around to face the boys. Jerome and John pulled Tristan back to the stage and Diana forced Kira to face him, but Kira wouldn't meet his gaze. Diana let her go, but Kira knew there would be no point to even try to none. "She's pathetic, Tristan," Diana spat from behind Kira. "She couldn't fight. She doesn't know what she is. She couldn't even run away, and this is what you fancy yourself in love with." Diana circled around to face Kira, and Kira met her cold, almost crystal, eyes with the little courage she had left. "Diana!" Tristan growl _shut him up, Diana yelled back, revealing the depth of her anger, and Kira watched as Jerome held Tristan while John ripped his shirt to gag him. "Your faux confidence is amusing," Diana said and grabbed hold of Kira's chin. 12D rather see you beg though." Kira remained silent. Diana slapped her across the face and Kira fell to the ground holding her cheek, knowing it yowled bruise but trying to ignore the pain. "Have you figured it out yet, little Kira? Hat we are? How you'll die?" Kira looked at Tristan. Her leg had almost stopped bleeding. She wondered if it would clear his head. Was it her or her that called to him? Kira looked at Diana and saw her smile. She finally noticed the 12-pointed teeth sticking slightly over her lip and Kira couldn't help but wonder when monsters had a reality. Kira was amazed at her own eerie calm and acceptance of situation. "Vampires?" She thought to silently answer Diana, and as the word circled in her head, she knew it was true, the teeth, and the strength. But she thought of them on the basking in the sunlight, thought of the humanity in Tristan's eyes when he had looked at her in the steeple, and wondered what from the stories was really TME. Kira at Diana, at the smug on her face that already spoke of victory _if she was going to die anyway, She might as well go out with a bang, Kira decided and thought of a reading you, Diana? I think you're a jealous bitch who can't take the fact that Tristan cares about a mere human more than he's ever cared about you. You're the pathetic one, she said calmly. Pain flashed across Diana's face, but it quickly turned to anger. Kira was confident that her words had hit home, but maintained a neutral expression so she didn't give away how much the little victory meant and how scared she truly was. Diana grabbed Kira by the neck and picked her up off the floor, so her feet rested an inch in the air. Kira started choking from the lack of oxygen. You are nothing, Diana spat in Kira's face, and then set her back down on her toes. But, before Kira had settled on her feet again, Diana's hand whipped around and her nail cut open a long line across Kira's cheek. Diana slowly ran her finger along the cut and pulled it back so Kira could see the on her finger. Diana brought the blood close to her mouth, and when she sniffed it, there was a flash of longing in her eyes. It repulsed Kira and she looked away, a mistake that gave Diana an advantage to use. Do you think he's different, Kira? Diana glanced at the blood on her finger. Do you think he doesn't thirst for you like I do? That he's kind and gentle? Well, he's not. Diana moved to the trap Tristan, who had a look of dread on his face. She walked closer and Tristan couldn't gaze away from Kira's blood on her finger. He struggled to and tried to, and eventually managed to look instead at the floor but Diana grabbed his face with one hand to hold it steady, removed his gag and let her finger wander up to rest on his lips. Kira watched as Tristan tried not to move his mouth, tried not to taste her blood. Diana her finger clean on his closed lips and waited like she knew he wouldn't be able to resist. Tristan shook from the exinion of trying not to open his mouth, of trying to resist the innate urge to lick the blood clean from his lips. Kira wanted to look away, but she needed to see this, she needed to knock her feelings for Tristan right out of her head. Before long, Tristan looked at Kira with feelings of pain and guilt and self-loathing, and slowly opened his mouth to stick out his tongue and swallow. Kira saw the flash of pleasure across his features, the slight glow in his eyes, and knew the image would stay with her for a long time. Diana clapped at her own ingenuity, like a 5-year-old playing with Barbie dolls, and walked back to Kira. She slid her finger along Kira's cheek and took her own taste. Kira saw nothing but pleasure in her eyes, and that was how she still knew Tristan was different. Not guilt-free or perfect or even good, but certainly not the same of evil as the cold blue eyes of Diana's that showed no ounce of remorse. Kira watched helpless as Diana moved close again, and couldn't look away as Diana held her gaze like Tristan had in class. She felt the shiver of fear, thought of her family that she would miss, but knew there was no way out. Soulless glowing blue eyes into hers with excitement and Kira was paralyzed and helpless to stop it. Diana didn't move closer for the kill, but instead remained still to enjoy watching Kira. A smile spread across her features, like she knew Kira didn't know enough to escape. But then, in an almost comforting way, Kira felt that surge of warmth like she had before in the classroom. Instead of being scared at this unfamiliar feeling, Kira welcomed her 0VN power coming through, the heat funneling to her hands, and she knew she would be able to escape. Kira tried to move free of the hold, but still couldn't. The heat from her hands soon became too much. In Diana's unfaltering stare, Kira knew she was still in danger, and, for a second, she thought that maybe Tristan had let her escape in the classroom, as though he had known what was happening inside of her and knew how to stop it. Diana had no such concern, and Kira staffed to feel as though she were burning from the inside out, as though her head turned to lava and was coursing through her body destroying everything in its path. Kira stalled shaking. Diana mistook it for fear and started laughing. Kira couldn't stop the vibration racking through her body. The heat was excruciating. She began to scream, and she barely Tristan's Pam as he struggled against John and Jerome to try to save her. She felt like a bomb, and as Diana finally sank down to take her deathly bite, Kira finally exploded. All Kira felt was the release of the heat going away and seeping out of her, and when the Pam was almost gone she opened her eyes and saw fire streaming from her hands. Diana, John, Jerome and Tristan were pressed against the back wall of the theatre, held there by the light coming from her hands, unable to escape. Kira didn't know how to turn it off. She didn't know what was Tristan's eyes flkl of pain and fear, and Kira realized she was hurting him, destroying all of them, and that they were afraid of her. Kira couldn't move and could barely breathe, she just stared at her hands, unable to control anything. She felt different hands on her shoulders, shaking her, and distantly heard someone screaming her name, but she felt like she was outside of herself and was watching this scene as if it were a movie. She almost wanted Diana to feel pain and to die, she almost wanted to kill her. The thought snapped Kira back to reality and she realized it was Luke who was standing before her. He shook her and called her name. Somehow she knew he could help. That he was like her. Pan of her was mad he never told her, but a much more prominent part of her knew she needed his help, and was overjoyed to see him. Kira, listen to me, you have to stop. You to release them. He 6k calmly, with a commanding voice. How? She cried, not knowing how to turn it off. She was scaring herself. Just close your fists and let go of the anger. He tried to her and ran his hands up and down her arms. She attempted to let go of the fear of knowing how close she had come to death. She tried to let go of the anger at Diana for wanting to kill her, and for torturing her and Tristan to do so. Kira tried to let go of the anger at Tristan for giving in and showing her that her trust in him might not have been worth it, but most of all, she tried to let go at the anger she felt with herself, for not knowing who she was, for not being more demanding, for not being able to stop, for hurting Tristan, and for feeling the urge to kill. And the fear was the worst. How could she let go of the self-fear, the fear of what she was and what she was capable of? When Kira admitted all of this to herself, she felt a slight release, and though it took all of her strength, she slowly brought her fingers down to curl into her palm. Kira brought her thumb around to hold the light and trap it within her hands. Tendrils of fire tried to seep through the cracks in her hand, but Kira held steady until finally the heat died and she was able to just let it go. She looked at the back wall where Diana, John and Jerome jumped from the crevices they had been pressed into and ran from the room. Tristan dropped slowly down and gave her one more glance. In that instant, she realized he was right, they could never be. He looked at her one last time, with sadness and fear, and followed his friends out. The Kira knew he was different, she could see the humanity in his eyes where it was absent from his friends, but it wasn't enough to make her chase after him. Instead, she looked at Luke, at his familiar eyes, friendly demeanor, and look of concern, and collapsed into his open arms as tears began to fall from her eyes. Chapter 7. Kira stared out at the churning waves, barely registering the body heat coming from Luke's arm around her shoulder. He had held her while she cried, and after a long time of sobbing, he had brought her to the Folly Beach pier to let the rhythm of the Ivatar calm her. They hadn't spoken more than 5 words to each other since he carried her from the auditorium, because Kira simply didn't know what to say. How do you ask if vampires are real and if what seemed like live fire just shot from your hands? How do you admit to yourself that you clearly aren't human, let alone ask someone else to it? Most of all, how do you confess that you started falling for the one guy your friend told you not to, and that everything he feared had come to me? It wasn't easy, Kira thought, to admit how naive you had been and to admit you were wrong about everything. It wasn't easy for her to think of Tristan, his eyes pleasure at the taste of her blood, or his eyes in pain as her power slowly started killing him. It was worse still to think of herself and what she was. Kira couldn't ignore it, but how in the world could she face it? How do you face it, she thought, and then herself, you just do. Luke. She tummed to him. Luke didn't move. He just watched and waited to see what she would say. It was like he knew what was coming, but also knew that Kira needed to hear herself say it before it could be Luke. What am I? A girl, he replied, half jokingly and half reassuringly. She nudged him with her seriously. No jokes, she said. He lifted his eyebrows in response as if to say who, me, but then realized even his jokes wouldn't adjust Kira's fru, and Kira could tell the instant his mood changed from protector to informer. She could tell from the alato of his eyebrows that the jokes meant to cheer her would exchanged for serious talk she wasn't used to from him. Kira felt sadder when he lifted his arm from around her back and tummed toward her on the bench to see her face. He knew everything, and it was his duty to tell her. First, do you know what Tristan and the others are? She her head to say yes. Tell me, Kiri, she breathed deeply, knowing the minute she said it out loud the scene haunting her thoughts would come true. The supernatural strength and speed. The blood and the teeth. It would all be real vampires, she whispered almost into the wind, but Luke heard her. Can you guess what we are? She looked at him. Thankful he had told her what she had already guessed. They were the same and she wasn't alone. But still, Kira had no idea and looked at him with blank eyes. Kira, we're something called condits, protectors if you will. We're the only living things that can hunt vampires, and I say living because we mostly believe that vampires are dead, but they frequently kill each other. She thought back to when Tristan had mentioned condits. Maybe he had been trying to help her. It sounded crazy. She was some son-of vampire slayer? But, it was the only explanation she had for what just happened. So, we're condits. Luke smiled when she said the word, like he was happy she had accepted the name without a fight. To be a conduit of something, you have to channel something, right? That was the light, I'm guessing, but I just don't understand. He took her hands and flipped her palms up, so she could see the pale red burn marks they now held. We channel the sun, and I know it sounds crazy, but that was the light you sent through your arms. It hurts at first, but it'll get better. The sun? That's not. She thought back to the feeling of lava running in her veins and the light that looked almost like fire shooting from her hands. Could she even say anything was impossible anymore? But how? Why? She asked. I'll get to that later, first. No, tell me now. It's been long enough, she yelled at him. Why didn't you tell me before? Why didn't you warn me? A little stay away from Tristan or you'll turn into a human light bulb if I even am human. I thought you were my best friend. I was so scared, I could die not even knowing that I could save myself. Darn it, Luke. Why didn't you say anything? She started crying again, now out of frustration. You wouldn't have died. Even though you didn't know in your head how to save yourself, your body knew danger and reacted. Besides, I wasn't allowed to, and before you open your mouth again, listen to me for 10 minutes. He reached out to cover her open mouth with his finger. You know how I said I was from a small town in Florida, called Sunnyvale? Kira nodded. Well, it's not just a small town. It's a haven for condits, so we can grow up together and practice without non-puffle around and without vampires to snatch us when we're little. Why wasn't I there? Kira asked. Why hadn't she grown up knowing who she was? Because you're different, and I was sent here to watch and protect you. Sent here? Like Forsecle to be my friend. Is anything in my life real? She ended quietly, asking more for herself than for Luke. Yes, our friendship is real. I was supposed to watch from afar. But, I'm getting ahead of the story. To explain what we are, I have to go back to the beginning, to the stories you were supposed to learn when you were just a kid. Kira nodded, signaling she would keep quiet until he finished. Ever since humans been around, vampires have been. Do you remember on the beach, how they were in the sun? Kira nodded. The stories were Tong, just being in the sun really kill a vampire. They are stronger than anything else in the world, and faster too. Their skin won't break open unless at the hands of another vampire, which is why there are so few ways to kill them. They do off and only human blood will do. But other than that, we don't know very much because they are incredibly hard to trap and study. All we really do know is that the sunlight is lethal, just not from the distance with which it shines. But I thought, he interrupted. I know, I just said the sun won't kill them, not like how it is in the movies with spontaneous combustion and dust and Hollywood effects. The sun slowly kills a vampire every time one is exposed, but the length of a year is like the length of a second to a vampire. So, it would take thousands and thousands of years for the sun's toll to have any effect. That's where we come along. When we channel the sunlight, it shortens the distance and makes the aging happen faster, so within minutes we can kill or harm a vamp. Are you understanding this at all? I think so, Kira shrugged. She was a superhuman conduit of sunlight, a protector against vampires that would otherwise be unstoppable. In a weird way, she thought it almost made sense. The sunlight had always armed her, not only physically, but also mentally, like she had a tie to it, and there was no other explanation she could imagine to describe what had happened. It was comforting to know she wasn't a monster but a savior. But Luke, I don't understand how I'm different. I wasn't raised with you. Just a little more patience, I promise I'm almost there. Kirasu allowed her next words to let him continue, and Luke back out towards the ocean. The constant chum of the waves, the monotonous pushing and receding of the water, her maintain a sense of calm, something she figured she would need as he went on. Amongst ourselves, there is debate how vampires, and therefore ourselves in response to vampires, evolve. Many believe vampires were sent by Satan after his fall from to take over God's creations on earth. They think that we were God's response, that we are heavenly avengers meant to kill the evil and rid the earth of them. They call themselves punishers. Many others think vampires evolved like parasites, and that the parasite needs a host and changes the human body for its own survival. They think there is something human, something redeemable within the creature, and therefore swear not to kill, but only to harm a vampire if it attacks a human. These conduits believe they naturally evolved as nature's response to the parasite, and call themselves this debate, this question of purpose, has been around as long as history can remember. It caused a huge split in the conduits and separate species, if you will, formal because of it. Punishers practice only killing and sprouted real hair that myth says is a sign of their inner anger. Eventually, they lost the ability to use the light only in defense and became killing machines. Protectors practice only tactics and developed almost white hair, as a reflection of the purity they see deep within a vampire's soul. They lost the ability to kill. And you're a protector? Kira asked, trying to follow along and knowing that Luke's blonde hair marked him as such. He nodded. But I'm neither. She still didn't understand, thinking of her own strawberry blonde. She didn't fit either category. Never in the history of both our people have the punishers and protectors been able to have children. It's been forbidden, because there is something else I haven't mentioned yet. Vampires can become immune to us. I don't understand. I thought we were some super race to stop them. Kira, the pier's wooden railing as dread formed in the back of her mind. She was different somehow, and it couldn't be good in a way, but then we would be all powerful over them. There's always a catch, and it's another reason the two races split. If a vampire drinks the blood of a conduit, he or she becomes immune until the blood leaves their system, which varies depending on the amount taken. If a vampire drinks a Punisher, he becomes immune to their killing light and could theoretically move from Punisher to Punisher, killing each and becoming stronger with each kill. It's too dangerous to even imagine. So, when the debate began, the sides to split not only to harvest different powers, but to make sure no vampire could become immune to both powers at the same time, which would mean he or she could wipe out both races. If a protector gets caught, Punishers must able to kill the vampire, and if a Punisher gets caught, protectors to trap the vampire until the leaves his system. Otherwise, vampires could unstoppable. It would be chaos-iv is where I come in. Luke's look told her she had guessed right, and Kira tried to figure out what she was. I'm a child races? I can aim to kill or to harm. Luke mkdid _ and I'm forbidden to exist. Luke nodded again. I could mean the end of the world. Luke looked away from her this time, and she felt tears form in her eyes again. Am I them? No, God no, Kira. Luke pulled her into his arms, so she was smushed against his chest, and they sat for a while as she trickled to absorb all of this new information. She was a thing of good, but could also mean the end of the world. So why had they even let her live? Why hadn't they forced her mom to have an abortion as soon as they found out? Kira thought of her mother and father. They didn't seem like rule breakers. Her mother's sweet red hair, her father's rather dull brown. She thought had he dyed it. But her sister's hair was and was he not really her father? Luke? Do you know about my parents? She looked up from the spot on his chest she had been crymg into. Are you sure you want to hear everything right now? He looked down at her with concern, and Kira tried to swallow the choke in her throat. The fact that he hadn't said no meant she had been on the right track. Her whole life was changing in one afternoon. Was she ready for more? Yes, I have to. Kira nodded into his wet t-shirt. I'm so sorry I have to be the one, but, Kira, well, the person you think is your mother is really your Aunt Bai, and the man you think is your father is really your uncle. She looked at him with blank eyes. She felt empty inside. Her entire life had been a lie. She felt as though reality were sand slipping through her hands, like someone had played an evil trick and was suddenly showing all of his cards. The game was over. Kira moved away from Luke, to the other side of the bench, and hugged her knees to her chest. She tried to let her tears fall as silently as possible, and knew she couldn't tune Luke out if she wanted to. Kira over at Luke before he continued, saw the huff in his eyes for her, his eyes that were so like her own, a hint of green engulfed by yellow and orange swirls flecked with red. He was good, unquestionably although, she had always known that the twinkle in his eye when he made someone laugh was enough to show that he only cared about spread joy, and he had only ever been a best friend to her. Even if everything was changing, she knew she would have him to rely on. She to him to keep talking. Your real mom was one off me ir.op1e, a protector, and your father was a punisher. They secretly fell in love and ran away together when they were found out. Your mother had you in secret, and when you were discovered, your father's people invented to kill you for being an abomination, but mine took pity because you were innocent, and we promised to watch over you. Your aunt, as your only blood, watched over you when you were young, but when you moved to New York we set up parameters and guardians. When you were 15, you stalled sneaking out with friends and becoming reckless, so we had to send someone in. Sai? My first boyfriend. She guessed, remembering how she had thought Luke looked like him the first day of school. She thought of how Sai had been overprotective and always called her. It hadn't been for love at all. For all she knew, he never even liked her. Her first kiss was a complete sham. It stung more than Kira realized it would. And then you, when I moved here, somewhere where vampires went to my school and my moth aunt couldn't watch me all the time. Luke nodded. She couldn't talk about her family anymore, not with Luke, not as though her life were some textbook story he had had to study and memophiz_. I need a break, I can't do this anymore right now. I 11 talk to my __ aunt later. It's just too much. Kira looked at Luke, really looked at his features, and wondered if her mother would have looked like him. Did her real mother have the same sun-bleached hair and fiery eyes? The same warm compassion? Was she alive or dead? Mostly, what Kira wanted to know was why neither of her parents had ever come looking for her. If her father was a punisher, was he only full of anger, or did either of them love Kira, or was she just a mistake that never should have been allowed to survive? Kira stood and walked to the pier's railing. Her mind was more tumultuous than the waters below her. She almost felt that if she jumped in right now, it would calm her to be pushed around a bit, that it would show her that the world continued on despite the madness in her brain. But, those thoughts just made her think of Tristan, who wouldn't be there to save her if she got overpowered by the again. Kira couldn't think of him yet. It was too much to think that the boy you maybe started to love was really evil, not just a bad boy, but actually a monster. I wanted to tell you, Luke said from behind her, and she was happy to have him interrupt her thoughts. 1,000 times I wanted to tell you, but I an oath. You had to your powers on your own. I wasn't allowed to tell you about anything in case the mix of Punisher and Protector cancelled each other out and left you just a normal human girl. When I saw your eyes, I knew it couldn't be true. I knew you weren't a dud, and that you were incredibly strong. But still, I had to be idle. I know I may joke a lot, and break some of the rules, but there are some rules I know I can't test. I wish you had, she said, speaking to the Ian she couldn't and look him in the face. I know. But I understand why you didn't. Kira still spoke to the wind. Knowing his intentions helped, but she still couldn't get rid of the small sting of betrayal. Really? She heard the creak of wooden planks as Luke stood up from the and right behind her, like he needed to be closer to Kira to believe she really meant her words. I know you, and I know you hoped there was a chance I wasn't supposed to be in this world where vampires and conduits exist, and that there was a chance you wouldn't have to be the one to turn my reality upside down. Can you forgive me? Luke reached to put his hand over the one she had rested on the rail. Kira tried to smile, but couldn't. Instead, she squeezed his hand in her own, trusting he would understand what it meant, and finally met his sad, puppy dog-looking eyes. Luke pulled her into his chest for another hug. I'm still your best friend even if everything else has changed. I promise, that was never contrived. She nodded against his body, not wanting to move from his comforting embrace. She knew he was telling her the TMTH, and Kira knew she needed him. She needed someone she could TMST completely, and someone who could help her survive whatever jummy her life had just turned into. Can we leave the Tristan talk for another time? I know you're curious, but I just of course. Luke, I can't go home yet. I can't face it. When I see my parents, it'll all become real. When I look at their faces for the first time and don't see a family resemblance. Kira cut off trying to choke back the sob that had risen in her throat. Come on, he tugged on her hand, pulling her from the rail back towards the beach. Let's grab some ice cream. You can stay on my couch for the night. Your parents won't mind. Kira _____, I'm your guardian. I'm 20 and I live alone. I'm only pretending to be in Hio. She shut up. One more surprise might send her over the edge. There was only so much a girl could endure before the fake calmness wore off and all the feelings she had pushed down bubbled back up to the surface. They walked down the boardwalk holding hands, and Kira relished the contact. She thought it darkly humorous that passers-by might think they were sweaty fies _ how many people had she walked past who were secretly watching her and guarding her? She bet she had passed vampires before and had never twice, never even dreamed something like this could be TME. Luke bought them 2 ice cream cones and Kira listened as he spoke of trivial things like miles, school craze and class assignments. She knew he was just providing background noise, that he knew she was lost in her own thoughts. He didn't try to intrude. He just tried to give her some semblance of normal, to maybe make her laugh. Kira wondered when she yowled laugh again, as she remained stone-faced at Luke's attempts. When they finished, Luke stirred Kira around to his car and drove her to his house. It was small and he explained that it had been given to him when he moved here to start watching over her. She wondered if he was getting paid and how much of a job this was for him. Was it a normal thing for a conduit to have to do? To act like a babysitter? Or did they all stay in their safe havens, not even trying to go out and search for people to help? She knew nothing about her culture or her own people. It was an odd feeling to have barely any idea where you came from. Her mother had always told her she had an Irish heritage, and when she was little, Kira used to spend hours reading about the myths and old Irish folklore. She liked having a sense of history and it was important to her to be able to connect to the past. But now, she was part of this ancient secret society she knew almost nothing about. Most of all, Kira wondered about her parents, her real parents. She wondered who they were and why her aunt had to raise her. The mystery of her sister was easy to explain now. Kira almost laughed to herself. Ever since her sister had born, she had asked whom the mistake had. Clearly, Kira was the misfit. It was almost comforting to have one question answered, but the answer left her feeling empty. A mistake? The word rolled around in her head, knocking everything out of place. Not only her parents' mistake, her life itself was also a mistake, one that could end the world as she knew it if more vampires found out. Luke left her in the living room to go find some blankets for the pull-out she would sleep on. When he came back, he unfolded the couch and made it into a bed for her. He fluffed the pillow and pretended to be a bellhop showing her around a hotel suite, but went to get her water when she never cracked a smile. Kira's cell phone rang while Luke was in the kitchen. The caller ID said it was home, her mother she assumed, but she let it go to voicemail. When she closed her phone, she saw the edge of the burn mark on her hank. She let herself fall onto the couch so she could peer at the spot more closely. Her hands like they had little starbursts on them, like she had put a red paintball between her palms and pressed together to make it explode. She ran her finger along the edge and felt the raised line of the burn. It didn't sting at all. She hadn't even her hands until Luke had mentioned the marks to her on the pier. "It'll go away," Luke said when he walked back inside and saw her staring. He gave Kira the glass of water. "The bums I mean after a while they'll go away and each time you use your power, they'll show up less and less." Kira clenched her fists in a way. She didn't want to think about using her power. Kira, we're not evil, it's a gift not a curse. She rolled her eyes and grabbed for Thuater, taking it from Luke's hand. "I'm going to show you something I used to do as a kid when I couldn't fall asleep." He left the room and returned after a few minutes with a 6-inch disco ball in his hand. Kira finally laughed. "You danced disco when you couldn't sleep?" "Hey, have you know I do a mean rendition of the Saturday Night Fever dance, thank you very much." He laughed with her and she felt almost happy. But the moment passed. "Okay, Kira, I know you. I know you're afraid of yourself right now, of what I've told you, but it can't be a beautiful thing. When I was little, my mom always told me how I would grow up to help save people's lives. And I'd sit in my bed at night, so angry I was just a kid and couldn't go out on adventures yet. So when I couldn't sleep, I would practice my skills just hoping and waiting for the day when I would good enough to leave Sunnyville for the real world. But, right before I went to bed, I would take out my disco ball. Stop laughing. I would take out this totally awesome and not at all embarrassing or funny disco ball I stole from my older sister and do this. Kira smothered her giggle as Luke lifted the string attached to the disco ball and held it in front of them. With his other hand he spun the ball, then shot a small, completely controllable sliver of light from his hand. As soon as the struck the disco ball, circles like moving diamonds twinkled and spun around the dark room. She looked around, feeling more like she was in a planetarium than a living, and was awed by the scene. He let the light die out and gave her the disco ball. When you're ready, we 11 start practicing your gift. And when you feel comfortable, pull this from your drawer and give it a UI_. He stood from the couch and Luke heckled back at her before he walked to his room. Good night, Kira. Night, Luke, she said as he disappeared around the comber. She let the silver globe fall into her lap and kept an eye on the spot Luke had just vacated. Why, she asked herself, couldn't she fallen for him instead? Luke was perfect. He was feminine and charming, and someone she could tell everything to, but still she thought of him as a brother. He could spill light from his own hand, but still couldn't spark anything within. Something was wrong with her, Kira decided, since she was some sort of mixed breed freak. Her heart just didn't work the right way. Maybe she was only attracted to other misfits, which was exactly what Tristan was after all. He was a vampire who seemed to want to be human. You couldn't get more out of place than that, she thought. Kira sighed and laid down on the sofa, curling under the blankets Luke had set up for her. As she rolled up into a fetal position, Kira wished that when she woke up tomorrow it would all dream. But maybe that, she realized, was just too impossible to ask for. Chapter 8. The next morning, when Kira woke up on Luke's couch, drool dribbled down her cheek and her head pounded from a headache. Yeah, she thought, yesterday really happened. She smelled coffee from the kitchen and dragged herself from the warmth of the covers to face her new life. Today, she had to talk to her mother. Kira had to learn about her real parents and about her history. There was no turning back, and there never would be. All she could do was rise to the challenge. I guess we can add Skip to the list of badass things you've done, Luke said, as he entered the living room. It's right up there with taking on 4 Varn all by yourself. She tried to smile, and the cup he handed to her Advil. She asked. He nodded and returned a few minutes later with 2 maroon pills in his hand. Headache? She nodded. How are you feeling? Viz. A little shocked and awed, a little scared out of my mind, and just a little like myself. Kira another sip and felt a lush of warmth spread through her body in a completely natural sort of way. It was refreshing. So what happens now, Luke? I take you home and you talk with your mom. You mean my aunt? No, I mean your mom. Whether she gave birth to you or not is irrelevant. She still raised you and she's still your mom. Kira nodded slightly at his words, hoping she would eventually feel the same way and not just betrayed. I meant more along the lines of, I've accepted this whole supernatural world business and I've accepted whatever birthright I have, so what happens now? I'm supposed to train you and teach you, but we can worry about that later. Now, let's watch the new episode of Top Chef I'll have saved on my DVR. You observe the and I'll observe Padma Lakshmi. Sometimes I worry about you, Kira said as she rolled over to lean her head on his shoulder. It was her favorite show and she relished in the normalness of it. For the next hour, Luke made inappropriate comments about the host and Kira unsuccessfully tried to turn his attention to the art of being a chef. They sipped coffee and attempted to enjoy the peace. But, Kira felt her heart constrict when Padma resolutely said, "Please pack your knives and go." The words sounded more like a death sentence to Kira, who knew she needed to pack up and go as well. Her parents would be furious with her and had probably been calling her non-stop. Thank for the ability to turn a cell on silent, Kira thought to herself. She helped Luke put the pull-out couch away and folded the sheets she had used. Then Kira dropped the dusty brown cushions back in their place. Cal tied the dirty dishes into his tiny old-fashioned kitchen with hideous blue cabinetry, and finally grabbed her handbag to follow him out the door. "Luke," she said after a while of driving in silence. He looked over in her direction to show she had gained his attention. "Thanks for everything. For letting me spend the night, for coming to stop me when I couldn't stop myself, and for doing the hard thing by telling me the TMTH_." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "Do you think we could do something on and normal tomorrow? It will be Saturday," she asked when they pulled up in front of her house. "I'll rally the troops and surprise you. Now, good luck. Call me if you need me." "Thanks," she said as she pushed the car door open and slid out. Luke drove away, leaving her alone in front of her home. It had never seemed as daunting as it did then. The was in the driveway, meaning her mother had skipped out on work. The real question in Kira's mind was, is she angry, or will I open the door to screaming and yelling, or hugs and kisses? If Kira knew her mother, the wrath of GKNI was to fall upon her. Hesitantly, Kira lifted her foot, let it hover the ground for a moment, and then placed it in front of her to begin the long walk to her front door. She had decided this moment to rise to the occasion, and Kira had a feeling this conversation would the toughest part. The front opened before she even had time to take her key out of her handbag. "Ivy, here have you been?" her mother shouted and pulled her inside by the arm. "Your father and I have been tied sick. We were up all night. I must have called you 100 times, but did you call us back?" "No. Of course not. Bother to calm the woman who has raised you since birth and thought you dead in a ditch by the side of the road?" Kira fought the urge to scream back and allow her mother to vent her frustration. It almost felt normal, and in some weird way the fight comforted rather than hunkered. But all she kept thinking was, how dare you yell at me? You lied to me, for my whole life you lied to me. Who are you? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you protect me? Kira let out a slow breath and tried to rein in her anger. She needed answers, and she had a feeling that she would need family. Eventually, they could be her TME family. Agam_. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Her mother panted when she had finished ranting. "I almost died," Kira said softly. She wasn't sure how to talk to her mother about this without sounding accusatory, and she figured remaining calm would be the best decision. "Vampires almost killed me." The words came out with a trace of bitterness that Kira couldn't fight, but she couldn't hide all her feelings. She almost wanted to cry and fall into her mother's arms, but she held back and watched as her mother's hand rose to catch the gasp leaving her mouth. Kira observed as her mom backed up into the couch and, like an afterthought, fell into a seated position. Oh God, her mother, until Kira came to sit down next to her. Where was Luke? I imagined D been in real danger. Kira grabbed her mother's shaking hand. It's okay, I myself. Kira let her words linger. Her mother stiffened and looked at Kira with eyes full of horror. How much do you know? Not everything, but enough. I stayed with Luke overnight because I needed some time to adjust before I came home. I wasn't sure how it would feel to look at you knowing I was just a mistake, that I'm your charge and not your daughter. Oddly enough, it feels half normal and only half painful. Kira let her fingers slip from her mother's and moved to the other end of the couch, rolling her knees into her chest. Her mother sat very still, looking straight ahead with wide eyes. Will you ever forgive me? She whispered while bowing her head into her hands. I hope so, Kira answered truthfully_ally. She didn't know if she could ever let the pain of not knowing who she was fall away. She loved her mother, but right now she felt as though she didn't know who her mother really is. Were you ever going to tell me I was adopted? That my whole life has been a lie? Oh, Kira. Her mother reached for her hand, but Kira moved it away, not ready to forgive her yet. It hasn't all been a lie. I am your mother, in every way but genetically. Your father and I love you. Your sister you. We've always been a family. A tear escaped Kira's eye. Them if you won't forgive me right now, will you at least let me explain? Yes, Kira let the word slip from her mouth before she could stop it. This was the point of no return. Once the story was told, everything about her heritage and would be true, but in some ways she thirsted for it. She needed a history, a past to hold on to. You need to start with my real parents. Can we talk outside? Her mother asked while rising from the couch. These are stories even your father cannot hear. Kira nodded. She and her mother always had important conversations, like when she had wanted to go to boarding school, they had walked in a park for an hour. When she got her ears pierced, they had gone to the swing set in her old backyard. Something about the wind and the trees seemed calming. They made even the biggest arguments seem small. For the first time, Kira wondered if it was a conduit trait, that maybe something about being in the sun calmed her people. But, she pushed the thought aside, not wanting to linger on any musings that made her feel at all subhuman. Kira grabbed a blanket to wrap around her shoulders and quickly made instant hot chocolate to bring outside while her mother ran up the steps. She set her mother's cup on the table and nestled into the chair to wait. The air was cool on her cheek, a typical Carolina fall. The leaves of the dense forest behind her house misled with each churning breeze, almost like waves with their cyclical splash. But here, only the scent of salt in the air reminded her that she lived on the coast. Kira's mother walked outside in a sweat's hilt with a box of tissues in hand. Kira, I don't even know where to begin. I haven't spoken oft condits in years. Your father doesn't even know about my past. I never wanted any of us to a part of that world. Start with my father, your brother. What was he like? You are Punishers, right? Kira tried to keep the crack from her voice. She thought it the logical place to start, the beginning of her father's tale before he even met her real mother. She wished she had a picture, some son of token to remember them both by. Your father was amazing. He was the protective older brother, the ideal fighter, the perfect son, the dream boy, but most of all he was someone you knew without a doubt you could count on for anything in your life. He wanted to protect the entire world, to fight epic battles, and he started by helping me. Kira noticed that her mother's gaze had glazed over. She was staring somewhere beyond their backyard, back into her memories. When we were younger, he made sure none of the kids bullied me for being small and weak with my power. You see, Kira, I ran away from that world because I had no place in it. As a child, I could never truly channel the sun properly, and when my power matured at the age of 16, I still couldn't hunt a fly. To a Punisher that is the ultimate insult, and many of our people turned against me, but never your father. I lived at home, just waiting until I could leave and go to college and normal. And, he accepted me. Kira grabbed a tissue then. It seemed her mother and her had both been misfits in unfamiliar worlds, and she painted the most beautiful picture of her true father as someone fearless. Something Kira wished she had inherited some of. When he was 18, he went on his first hunt and made his first kill. He returned boasting of how much fun he had and how exhilarating the fight was. He said he was the only newbie who hadn't needed help from the elders to stop his vampire. I could tell, just by looking at him, that he had found his place and that he would grow to be one of our best fighters. Conduit CEDs are stuck in the past in many ways. The men went out to hunt for vampires to help protect humanity, and the women remained at home protecting the children in case our location was ever found out, and the entire town knew your father would be the best of us. Every time he came back from a trip, he shined with pride and others told the tales of his heroics. Because for us, the stronger the fighter, the more divine, and your father was seen as a heavenly angel to many of our people. But that all changed. Kira guessed, knowing this story had everything but a happy ending. Yes, that all changed. Most youths mature at 16 and stand going on guided missions, but at age 20 we are allowed to hunt alone. At first, your father acted much the same and came back with joy in his eyes. However, one day, a few weeks before he turned 21, he returned solemnly. Everyone thought he failed to catch his target for the first time, nothing unusual for a young hunter. They all let him be. But, I knew your father, and I knew something else was wrong. Did you talk to him about it? Kira asked Akel. Their society was so different from her own. She couldn't imagine the pressure of feeling like a warrior and never being able to make mistakes. Kira looked at her mother's round curls as they blew in the breeze, and wondered if she viewed it as a curse. I tried. I never forget what he told me. I had been in the kitchen washing the dinner plates when I noticed him sitting outside on the back steps, so I paused and went out to comfort him. I told him that everyone makes mistakes and everyone misses every so often, but I could tell they were just empty words. He was looking up at the stars with the conf sign in his eyes, and then he turned to me and asked, Ellie? Have you ever wondered if we were wrong? And for a moment I didn't understand. But, when he turned back to the night sky, I realized he meant us, the Punishers. Were we wrong in killing? Did vampires really souls? Of course not, I told him, full of confidence. We were never even allowed to question those beliefs, rooted in our ancestral history for thousands of years. I saw him shut himself away when I answered. He stood up and went inside to finish the dishes, and I was the one left to ponder why he would ever ask me that. How would you reply now? Kira asked her mother, realizing they almost mirrored the scene from her memories, sitting on the porch, but staring at the sun rather than the I've never seen a vampire who didn't appear evil to the core, but I suppose there are always exceptions to the rules. Her mother paused and Kira thought that maybe she was wishing she used that response with her brother, to provide some sort of solace. For a moment, Kira allowed herself to think of Tristan. Could he be that exception? But she shook her head and tried to focus on her real father and his story. It was my birth mother, wasn't he it? A protector changing his mind. Her mother nodded. I didn't realize it for a long time, but in the year that followed, he went on more solo missions and came back with ideas of capturing vampires and running tests on them rather than killing them. He wanted to research the old texts to see if anyone had ever found a vampire with his soul intact. He never found anything, but the elders were still so angry with him. He was their golden boy, and within a year he became dilt. I noticed he received secret letters and made whispered phone calls when he thought our family was asleep. I confronted him, but he never answered. I never dreamed he was secretly dating a protector. Of all the rules in our SC and TI, that is the most unbreakable and the most forbidden. For 2 years this continued, but soon after his 23rd birthday, he received news that scared him enough to finally come clean to me. I was 21 at the time and had been living away from home for a while. I had already met your adoptive father and we were so in love. Of course, I traveled home to visit, but the conduit life already seemed so far off to me. But, one day, I opened the off-me apartment to your father's very conflicted face. I read joy, but also the deepest sorrow, and I knew something was increastably wrong. Ellie, I remember him choking out to me before breaking down into sobs. I brought him inside and there he confessed to me that he had fallen in love with the most beautiful woman in the world, one who had the purest blonde hair imaginable. At first, I was horrified. I wasn't sure whether to comfort 01 or to scold him, but I knew I was all he had. He told me how they first met while she had been living in New York trying to protect its citizens from the ever-increasing local vampire that had been the site of his first solo mission, and they had been tracking the same clan when they ran into each other. At first, they hated each other, but then they realized they needed to help each other in order to hunt down and weaken the clan. They started debating philosophies until each was unsure of the lessons they'd been taught since birth. And, when they hunted down the clan, your father killed and your mother weakened, but neither felt the same joy as before. He said from that first meeting, they never stop talking. At first, it had secret run-ins in New York, then letters, then phone calls, until finally they had stopped taking on real missions and just to meet each other in private. He said they had secretly gotten married a month ago and he pulled out a ring from a chain around his, and finally, he showed me a letter your mother had just written, confessing she was pregnant with a child, and it was the worst news imaginable. Kira guessed and sipped at her hot for solace. She sank her into her seat and grabbed a preemptive tissue to wipe at the tears that would soon be falling. No, your father was the happiest I had ever seen him, but it was difficult. They knew there would be no turning back. A child meant a life on the run, because you had to be kept secret. He confessed to me that they had made a plan to meet up where they had first met and run away, and keep running if that was what would needed to keep you safe. He was going to completely turn his back on his all for you, the unborn child he already cherished above everything else. But the plan backfired. Kira asked and her mother nodded. This seems to be a story where everything that could have gone wrong, did go wrong. In many ways, it was. Your father and mother did run away together, and you were born 8 months after your father had come to see me. I was the only one he told, and I begged him to come see me, to let me see you. He told me they had found a safe place and he couldn't give it away, but that they would chance it and come to me. I was overjoyed. For one secret weekend, your father came to visit me and I met your mother and you. You were the cutest baby ever, only 2 months old and already with a all set of curly blonde and red hair. You always had a smile on your face, and to the outside viewer all 3 of you would have looked like the perfect family. In the short hours I spent your mother, I learned she was caring and gentle. She was an amazing woman, and I easily how the 2 of them had come to love each other. When they left, I assumed it would be years before I could meet you again, but in reality it was only a few short days. What happened? Kira asked, knowing the heartbreaking story of her true parents was about to come to an end. Her mom was just about 23 in the story, and Kira knew that was the age she had always been told she was. On their way back home, they were discovered by punishers from a different state. They were captured and questioned, and you were almost put to death until your mother's people came to argue for your life. In the middle of the night, your father tried to escape. He found your mother and you, but while run me away, you 3 were jumped by vampires. Your father was killed, as was your mother, but the vampires had all shared a little of the blood, so none was completely immune to our powers. We got there just in time to save you and hold them at bay by mere feet. We rescued you and saved your father's body, but your mother's was still on the other side of the barrier our powers had created. When we went back the next day, it was gone. And I was given to you, my closest relative, so I could live outside of that world and maybe have a chance at a normal life. The protectors agreed to guard me, and you and father adopted me to save me. And also to love you, as I always have. I used to pray at night that you hadn't been gifted with any powers, but as you grew I knew that wasn't true. You had eyes of fire and hair to match, and my prayers turned to hoping you would never find out what you were. But, one did. You did. Her mother sadly. She had barely looked at Kira while they spoke, too afraid to see judgment from her daughter's eyes. The change saddened Kira, as the slight awkwardness in the air spoke of their forever altered relationship. What were their names? Kira asked, wanting a small thing to remember her parents by. Names were simple, but held so much meaning. Andrew and Lana. Kira another tissue to wipe at her face. The story of her parents was sadder than she imagined. She had hoped they weren't dead, maybe just locked away somewhere. In a way, it seemed like they had only just diaklebos, she had only just found them. Kira watched the fading sun sink beneath the tree line, and I watched the ruby wisps of cloud stand to fade. Her mother and her had outside for a long time. Kira appreciated the stories. She had needed the stories, but it wasn't enough to make her forget everything else. I have to ask why you knew or told me? Even knowing I was adopted without knowing all the details? I could handle this new world of the Condits so much easier if every other facet of my life wasn't shattering along with it. Kira's mother eased from her seated position and I walked the 3 short steps required to stand before her daughter. She knelt, cupping Kira's hands in her own, trying to close the distance that had sprouted between them. I just didn't know how. I wanted to. Your father and I discuss it every year. First we excused it because you were too young, then you were going through and we knew that was a fragile time for building an identity. Then your sister came around and we didn't want you to resent her, and then you were in New York and so far away. And then I came home as an adult. Kira pulled her hands away and returned them to the empty mug on the side table. Her mother let her hands drop to the floor, as a tear slid from her cheek. You're still my baby. I didn't know how to tell you without breaking the family apart. I understand, in a lot of ways I really do, but I'm just not ready to let it go. I need some time to adjust, so can we put the pause button on this conversation? A break and time to think. Kira resituated herself in the chair so her body leaned away from her mother's. She needed to be alone, to ruminate in peace. Her mother understood, and stepped backwards, giving Kira space. Of course, I just want to give you one thing. Her mother drew a small from her pocket and put it onto the table next to the now empty mugs of hot chocolate. It's a token I've had locked away for a while. Remember I told you that my brother came to visit with you? Well, we a single photograph and I put it in a locket that I always meant to give to you when I told you the TMTH_ let me know if you kneel me, but I 11 leave you alone for a while. When her mother had disappeared inside the house, Kira lifted the packet and heard the jingle of a chain scratching against paper. She typically and let the necklace slide out. There was a silver oval, completely plain with no engravings, and next to it on the chain was a gold ring the size of a man's finger. She at the inside arch of the band and read the cursive words etched there. Love will prevail, your Lana his wedding ring, she realized. No, not his, Kira thought her dad Andrew's wedding ring, the one that tied him to his TME love, her mother Lana. Kira clutched the ring to her chest, letting tears fall freely, and used her other hand to open the locket, which had fallen to the other end of the chain. Her father and mother held her between them. 3 smiles and 3 pairs of green speckled eyes out from the photograph. Kira couldn't believe she had no memories left from those few months she had had alone with her parents. Her father's hair was a mop of red curls and freckles spanned his cheeks. His smile was wide and open, just like hers in that it was hard to tell if she were laughing or just smiling. Her mother's hair looked like the sun. It was so perfectly blonde and straight like Luke's. Her smile was more reserved, but her eyes were the same large as Kira's, just slightly too big for her face. Kira wondered if her own had ever looked so full of joy and secrets, and there Kira was, a tiny little baby sandwiching them, laughing and looking up at her mother. Kira stared at the photo. It was minute in size, but more important to her than anything else she had ever owned. She moved over to the hammock and lay down, staring at the open facial locket while time passed by unnoticed. This was the only connection she would ever have to them, and she wanted to memorize every detail she could. Kira wished she could recover just one memory, but her mind from those early weeks of life was too far gone. A car rolling on gravel distracted Kira, and she heard Chloe giggle and her father's deep laugh. They were home. Both were removed from the conduit world, and for a moment, Kira wondered what he thought the story was. How did he imagine her parent Chad Dial? A car crash? A murderer? No one but her mother had the real truth, the full story, except maybe her grandparents. Strangers to her, who she now knew must exist somewhere in the world, but had never wanted anything to do her. The screen door opened. "Honey," the baritone voice of her father asked. "I spoke with your mother. I just wanted to see how you were. If there was anything I could do." Kira shook her head. And I always have." "I know," Kira replied, still turned away. She heard him sigh as he went back inside. Kira was sure her mother had told him not to push her and to let her be. She curled her up like a baby, closing the laket and gripping it to her chest, as close to her heart as possible. The stars were starting to appear in the ever-darkening sky, and Kira let her tears pool. Kira cried for the life she was robbed of as a child, the one she felt she had just been robbed of. She cried for her dead parents, and for her living substitutes now guilt-ridden over their lie. Mostly she thought about what could have been and what will be. About training with Luke and what training with her parents might have been like. She wondered if her parents would have told her the histories of the Condits like bedtime stories to gradually fall asleep to. Somewhere in all the sorrow, Kira fell asleep and let her dreams do the imagining for her. She hardly noticed when her real-life father picked her up from outside and carried her inside to bed. Chapter 9. A ringing phone woke Kira the next morning. Her eyes were swollen, and she was dehydrated and dizzy from the days before. When she turned over and she felt a chain roll across her skin and she pulled the locket back over her hilt, cupping it in her hand. At least it was something, Kira mused. She had photographs and stories, some little tokens to remember them by. Love will prevail, she thought. It was comforting to know her parents loved each other enough to risk it all to be together. She hoped she could do the same if the time ever came. The incessant ringing sounded in her ear again and Kira reached under her pillow to grab her cell phone. She looked at the caller ID. Luke_. Was she ready to get out of bed and face the world? No. But, Kira realized, she would probably never feel ready to start moving on to her new life in a new world she had yet to figure out. She flipped open her cell_hello. Kira's voice came out scratchy and hardly loud enough for her own ears to hear. "You sound like crap_, thanks." She rolled her eyes at Luke, wishing he could see her reaction, some sign she was at least alive enough to make fun of him. Get out of bed, get dressed and be downstairs in 10 minutes. The gang and I are on the way. Lorkel, couldn't you have given me some warning?" Kira asked, jumping out of bed and running to her closet. 10 minutes was not nearly enough time for her to start looking like a human being. She needed to shower and she needed some caffeine. "Ah, sorry. I totally forgot you're a girl. Emma said I should have called you earlier. Tell her I said thanks." "See you." Kira hung up and used both hands to search her closet for jeans and a super comfortable sweater to wear. She might be venturing outdoors, but she still wanted to feel as though she was lounging in her PJs. 5 minutes later Kira heard a beep outside and cursed Luke for of course being early. She peered out off her window while quickly buttoning her jeans and saw Emma kick Dave out of the front seat of her small convertible. He sheepishly jumped into the back with the boys and Kira. Decided to hurry up. He pleaded to steal shotgun again. "Hey!" Emma waved from the driver's seat as Kira walked outside. Kira smiled. "So, what's the mystery event today?" "Luke didn't give me any information over the phone." "Well, it was my idea," Emma began while fiddling with the radio and shushing the boys' complaints when Taylor Swift came on. "Shopping?" Kira guessed from the glimmer in the other girl's eyes. "Costume shopping?" Emma seemed positively giddy as she pulled away from the curb and eased onto the empty street. She stepped on the gas and the car sped down the road. Kira liked feeling the wind in her hair and the roar of other cars when they tumbled onto a busier street. It drowned out her thoughts, and part of her felt like a normal girl about to spend a crazy afternoon with her friends. Halloween is in 2 weeks and we have nothing to wear. It's a travesty. Emma infused feigned sadness into her voice. Well, at least Kira thought it was feigned. We need to get costumes now before all oft good ones are taken. And I figured we could all plan some sort of theme together. Not this again. In the back seat, Miles scrunched up his face, making his glasses slant sideways. Oh please, it'll be excited. Emma released both hands from the wheel to make her point. Kira jumped forward and grabbed it before the car could swerve out of control. Emma flashed her a sheepish smile. I'm with Miles. I rails to dress up as a Ken doll, Dave added, almost under his breath, but loud enough for Emma to notice. It was only an idea. Emma let her sentence trail off. Kira laughed, picturing the boys as Disco Ken with sequined blazers on. I've got it. Luke chimed in from the back seat. Everyone but Emma, now making the effort to concentrate on driving, turned to look at him. Power Rangers Kira groaned. I rails to wear a yellow jumpsuit. Never happening. No way. You could wear the pink one. Luke trailed off, anticipating a slap. Instead, Kira tumbled around in her seat and simply rolled her eyes at him. He laughed it off, but held her eyes for an extra second. She nodded subtly, trying to let him know this was exactly what she had and that she was finally feeling a little. The bickering that constantly seemed to befall their little gang was making her forget all about the other thoughts churning in her head. I'm with Kira. No way. You and I can't look sexy as a Power Ranger. I beg to differ, Dave chimed in from the back. Kira saw Emma flash him a smile through the rearview mirror. Ivy had about the Scooby Gang. Kira tried to contribute to the debate. There are only 4 of them. Miles said from the back. I know. Luke can be Scooby. Everyone laughed, except for Luke, who just claimed he was too tall to pretend to be a dog. They pulled up in front of the mall, and Emma slid her car into a parking spot as they jumped from their seats and headed toward the front doors. A peace treaty was figured out. Everyone would come up with a theme later, and after 15 minutes of walking around, they all choose the best one. The end. The mall was crowded and Kira immediately tensed up. She couldn't help but imagine how many of those held deathly secrets, or how many might fry to kill children. Laughed as they played on the jungle gym setup. Here Santa's workshop would be in 2 short months. Their parents gazed on from the sideline. A group of preteen girls gossiped in the Comer, and, opposite them, were a group of goths Kira recognized from school. Everyone was harmless, she reassured herself. She had to believe it. The sun seeped through the skylight and, for once, Kira was truly grateful for the lack of artificial lights at this mall. She instantly felt warm all over and calmer. Luke came up to put an arm around her shoulder. She realized the rest of the group had left them behind to walk toward the costume shop at the other end of the mall. Are you okay? Luke asked, pushing her down the walk a little. Her feet fell in step with his and she staffed to break from the trance. She nodded. %. Do you tell them? No one commented on my slight mood. Nothing really, just that you were going through some family stuff right now. Emma really wanted to call you yesterday to check in, but I told her to leave it alone and that you didn't want to talk about it. Thanks. Kira nestled into his arm a little further. I still just don't know what to do. I spoke with my mom and she told me the whole story, all my parents. And she gave me this. Kira pulled the laket and ring out from underneath her suitor. She opened it and showed Luke the picture. He squeezed her shoulder, comforting her before she realized she was holding her breath to keep the pain from seeping out. Come on, he said, picking up the pace. No more sad thoughts. It's time to let Emma dress you up like her very own life-size Barbie doll. He smiled cheerfully as Kira whimpered and involuntarily walked into the Halloween shop. The first things she noticed were the life-sized animatecal skeletons and ghouls that were speaking and had anitric light-up eyes. Spider webs were not all over the ceiling and gruesome bloodied hands and heads lined the floor. A mechanical spider dropped from the ceiling, landing on top of her head, and Kira let out a loud yelp before realizing it was fake. A 5-year-old little boy laughed at her from the other side of the store. Annoying little kid, she thought while looking for her friends who all seemed to have disappeared. Kira. Emma waved her over to the back wall, which was lined with costumes and thankfully lacked the gore of the entrance. On the way to the female costumes, Kira spotted the boys huddled in a corner all holding different swords and speaking in hushed tones. She didn't like the look of it. Which one? Emma asked, holding up a pirate costume and a princess costume. Each one was shone with barely any fabric, and Kira knew it would leave little to the imagmat on. Kira said, not knowing how to answer. She wouldn't be caught dead wearing either one out in public. Okay, Luke, carn up them. The boys have come to a decision. Superheroes, supervillains, or pirates? Girls, take your pick. Kira noticed he still had a saber looped through his belt hole, making him look more like a little boy than ever. 00. Emma ran off without answering. She looked like she was in the middle of a eureka moment. Luke just glanced at Kira with a raised eyebrow and she shrugged. And Miles sauntered over. Looking out of breath. Sword fight. Dave exhaled. It was awesome. We need to pirates. Miles, Attic and Luke looked scared that they dared do something so amazing without him. But Emma came rushing back at that exact moment and thrust something that vaguely like black pleather into Kira's put it on. She squealed and ran into the dressing room behind her. Kira rolled her eyes, afraid that she had already guessed what it was, and followed suit. When she closed the curtain behind her, Kira unfolded the costume, in the mirror and a cameraman outfit of course. Kira didn't want to be caught dead in the thing, but knew she had to appease her friend. With a loud exhale, she stripped off her clothes and tried to squeeze into the skin-tight suit. When she was ready, Kira took a quick peek into the mirror, and she had to admit, she could. She had never ordered skin-tight leather before, but it definitely looked hot. Kira held the whip in her hand, put the mask on over her eyes and smiled. She looked nothing like herself, but she kind of liked it. The faux cat scratches up the side of her leg definitely really sexy, and she tried to push aside the part of her head that to wonder what Tristan H. would think. She couldn't let herself go there. Kira, come out. I bet you look awesome. Emma called from the other side. Kira peeked around the coffin and saw that a few feet to the side Emma was dressed in a Poison Ivy costume. The boys appreciative and were at the moment fighting over who got to be Batman if the theme stuck. Kira slid open the curtain and the boys dropped their jaws, halting the fight mid-argument. Kira smiled. It felt good. Wow, was all Miles said, scrambling to right his glasses, which had tilted during the argument. The other two boys remained silent, still slack-jawed. Perfect. Emma walked in front of her and with joy. These are the perfect costumes. We are going to look amazing at the party. Kira immediately felt her heart sink. It was one thing to dress like this in front of her friends, but another thing entirely to dress like this in front of the whole school. Yes, the party. The Halloween party? I thought you knew the school dance. I've only mentioned it 100 times. Oh, that party, Kira thought to herself. Right. Kira tried to recover. She could never let Emma know she didn't pay attention to half the things she said during lunch. The girl 6K at a rate of 100 miles per hour. You do like the costume, right? Kira saw the hopeful in Emma's eye, saw how the boys were inside. Yeah, I love it. Excellent. Emma practically skipped back into her dressing room. Kira pushed the Kultane aside, stepped back into her room and would have screamed, except a hand closed over her mouth and Tristan pushed her up against the milter, holding her so tightly she couldn't move. He closed the curtain tightly if his other Kira felt her body begin to heat immediately. She wasn't sure if his was his proximity or her powers, but she couldn't stop the flush that rose to her cheeks or the slight fear that crept into her eyes. Please, please calm down. I'm not here to hurt you. Please, don't be afraid. She saw the pleading glint to his eyes, and knew he would have already hurt her if he wanted to. She tried to swallow her fear and felt her body relax into his. Tristan freed her mouth and dropped his arms down to his sides. Hey, he said, smiling so slight dimples formed on his cheeks. He shrugged. Kira to smile in return, but stop Eklet, mentally shaking herself. She couldn't just forgive him. She forced herself to walk around Tristan's body and slide down the aisle to sit on the floor. The image of him licking his lips clean of her blood rose to the forefront of her thoughts, and Kira remembered the desire and repulsion that ran across his features. She looked away from him, unsure of how to act, had to say, and mostly what to feel. There was anger of course, but there was also sadness. She had missed him. She had tried not to, but Kira couldn't hide the bit of joy she felt at seeing him again. Please, say something. Tristan knelt down to sit next to her, keeping his voice barely above a whisper. She looked at him, at his pale skin, shaggy black hair and somehow warm blue eyes. He was evil beneath it all. She had to remember that, or else she would keep falling deeper under his spell. She didn't understand, looking at him now, why she couldn't fallen for Luke Instiakel at H. Would have been so much easier. But here she was, wishing he would sit a little closer and explain to her that none of it was IVHY. The two words escaped her lips before she even realized she had spoken. Hun filled his eyes. She felt the morning's joy quickly seeping from her, like a recycling tide. I'm sorry. He started to stand, shaking his head more at himself than anything else. Wait, she lightly touched his arm, but it was enough to make him sit back down again. I didn't mean it. It's just. It would have so much easier to hate you. She let her eyes fall to the ground, counting the feathers and sequins that had fallen off the many costumes that had been tried on in the small room. I know. They passed the next few moments in silence. Ivy hat do you want? She asked, daring to speak first and glance at him. I saw you and Luke walking over, and I just had to talk to you. I need to explain what happened. You know I would have never hurt you, right? She nodded, hoping I was going to tell you. I swear. But then Diana interrupted and we started fighting, and before I knew it things were spiraling out of control. And then there was the whole part where you almost killed me. He laughed a little, stealing a peek at her through his lashes. Sorry about that. She smirked at him in return. We'll call it even. A little shred of hope seemed to light his features. IVHY, were you almost going to kill me? The hope vanished, but Kira had to ask the question. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrate hell, that was their plan. Kira sucked in her breath. But, before I met you, I never would have let them go through with it. He hastily spoke, I'm not like that, I swear. I don't kill people. I know you might not me, but it's the truth. Kira knew she shouldn't, but somehow she did believe him. She started to say so, but heard Emma from the other side of the curtain. Are you okay, Kira? Crap, she thought. The dressing room really wasn't the ideal place for serious conversations. Yes, she mumbled for an excuse. Just having a little trouble with the zipper. No big deal. The boys are all in their costumes. Poke your head out. Kira glanced at Tristan and stood up. She stepped over his outstretched legs, suddenly remembering she was in a leather pantsuit. She could feel his eyes taking in her outfit and immediately felt embarrassed. She tried to quell the blush threatening her cheeks as she slid her head around the curtain. Kira barked out a laugh at the sight of Dave as Batman, Miles as Robin and Luke, of course, as the Joker. "Perfect," she said, meeting Luke's eyes and ignoring the questioning concern they held. "I know. We're going to make quite an entrance next week," Emma said. Kira noticed she was already dressed in her normal clothes and held a shopping bag in her hand. How long had Kira been in the dressing room? "Okay, I'll be out in a moment." She ducked her head back behind the curtain and glanced at Tristan as he jerked his head back from a position that seemed precariously close to one someone would use to check out her behind. "I have to go," she stated into an awkward silence, not sure how to get changed with him in the room. "Can we talk later? Will you meet me somewhere? There are so many things I still want to say." Kira wanted to say yes. She wanted to let him explain everything, wanted the fake mistletoe and stolen kisses one more time. But, she couldn't. "I'm not ready," she said, even as her heart screamed at her. "I don't know if I'll ever will. I know you didn't mean to ever hurt me, but that doesn't change anything. What you are, what I am." She let that last thought linger. There was still so much keeping them apart, so much she didn't know him and wasn't sure she wanted to find out. Kira turned away from him and Luke out past the curtain. All the boys were still comparing costumes. Close your eyes. She needed to get changed and he still couldn't leave. He put his hands over his eyes, but Kira noticed the slight opening between his pointer and middle finger. "Come on, close them," she said, making him stand up and forcing him to face the curtain while she changed behind his back. After a few excruciatingly quiet moments, she was back in her comfort jeans, happy she was free of skin-tight cat-soled hide. "Okay." He melted. She started to pull the curtain aside, but he quickly grabbed her hand, making her turn around. "You looked really hot, by the way." She smiled shyly. "See you at the dance," he winked, and Kira quickly bolted out of the dressing room, trying to keep her heart from beating right out of her chest. Kira practically ran to the cash register and bought her costume, telling everyone she would wait for them outside. She curled her knees into her chest and let her thoughts wander. What was she going to do? He drank blood, for crying out loud. How was she still attracted to him? Kira could never tell Luke, and maybe couldn't even tell Em. Would she risk it to see if she could? Tristan? Kira fingered the gold ring that now hung around her neck. Did she the courage? "Penny for your thoughts." Luke sat down beside her and she quickly let go of her necklace. Kira had realized one thing: she needed to learn control. Tristan had grabbed her, she could feel herself stand to explode. If it had been Diana or Jerome or John, she might have accidentally killed one of them in the costume store. Or, they could have killed her. She needed to lean more herself and her abilities. "I need to stand training with you, don't I?" Luke stared at her thoughtfully, probably wondering what brought this about. "Yet at some point you need to start learning who you are and how to use your abilities to protect yourself. Can at some point be like at some event next week." She lifted her lashes to view him. "Whenever you want." "Let's do it. There's one more thing I need to tell you." Kira waited, hesitant. "I need to stand sending reports back home. I haven't told them anything important about you, not yet. But, if we stand training, I need to let them, the council, know you have abilities. I don't think anything will change, at least for a few months. But, I thought I should tell you." "Thanks." Kira replied, and thought it once he sent that report, there would be no turning back. The protectors would know the threat she represented. The whole conduit community would probably learn about her powers and the danger she represented. All the more reason to train and to show them she had control. She had to prove to them that they hadn't made a mistake by protecting her all those years ago. Kira nodded in understanding, silently letting Luke know it was okay, as their friends finally approached. "Sorry, I got distracted." Miles looked sheepish as he apologized. Emma rolled her eyes. He challenged a 10-year-old to a lightsaber duel. "I swear, Miles, I hope you get into Harvard, because aside from us, those nerds will be the only ones who accept you." "Hey," he stalled, but then paused as if realizing the truth in the statement. "I sent in my early decision application finally. Did I tell any of you?" They all congratulated him, and Kira prayed he would get in. They all loved him, it was true, but unlike Luke, who pretended to be really childish, Miles really seemed to be a little boy sometimes. A few hours later, Kira finally pulled open the front door of her home and climbed the stairs to her shopping had utterly drained her, and she was happy to finally soak in the steaming hot water off her shower and let the stress of the past few days melt away. Wrapped in a soft, fresh towel, she slipped into her room and practically passed out on her bal. "What's this?" Chloe appeared from under her bed, scaring Kira half to death. "What's what?" Kira asked, pulling her little sister onto her lap, loving the fact that nothing had changed in that relationship. She still loved Chlkr with all of her heart, and they would always be sisters. "Chr," a piece of paper at Kira. "It's pretty." Chlkr smiled and Kira took the paper, sucking in her breath when she saw a drawing of her as Catwoman and a note that read, "Can't wait. Ivy, here do you find this?" Kira asked, finally finding words. On the bal. "Silly," her sister tried to take the paper back but Kira pulled it out of her little Amos' reach. Tristan had been here, in her Chr slid off her lap and tugged on Kira's arm. "Make me hot orderal _ Kira laughed and tried to get out of Chloe's grip while still holding onto her towel. "Let me get Drizzle first." Chloe pouted, but let go of her arm and rushed downstairs to wait in the kitchen. Kira strolled at the drawing for another moment before walking over to her and slipping it in with Tristan's other drawings that she had hidden in her jewelry box. She tried in vain to ignore all the questions creeping into her mind and quickly got dressed to appease the 4-year-old terror downstairs. Chapter 10 "I can't do this." Kira shouted at Luke in frustration _ "Just relax. Think about lighting the rock on fire. You can do this, I know you can." Kira at Luke, wanting to strangle him. "Real easy to feel so calm when you've been practicing since birth," she thought as she wiped the sweat from her brow. All the mental exertion was draining her. She and Luke had practicing for almost an hour and nothing was happening. Kira was almost beginning to think everything had been a dream. Clearly she had no special powers _ Kira stopped for a moment to look around Luke's backyard. They stood in a small patch of grass, surrounded by dense forest. Kira couldn't make out his neighbor's home through the bushes. Even in the sunlight, the trees were dark and Kira knew that if she walked 10 feet into the bushes it would be pitch black. A place to practice, Luke had told her when he picked her up from her house and brought her over to his place. No one would see anything and they would be completely safe. An entire week had passed before Kira had brought practicing up with Luke again, and since her parents had left for church without her this morning, she had called Luke right away _ Things were still awkward at home when her parents were around, but when she was alone, left with nothing but her thoughts, home was excruciating. Now, Kira wondered which was the lesser of two evils. "Come on, one more time and then we can take a break." Kira sighed and refocused her energy on the boulder Luke stood next to. He told her it wouldn't actually bums that vampires were the only things affected by the light, but she was a little afraid of hurting him if she couldn't rein it in once started. "Kira," he brought her back to attention. "Just focus," he had said, "it'll come to you naturally." "Well," Kira stared at the rock thinking, light on fire, please God give me a little flame," but nothing. Her palms didn't even feel warm. She threw them up in the air. "This is just never happening." I can't keep staring at a rock and pointing my hands in front of me. I might as well say abracadabra and try to make your house float away. This is ridiculous. Luke shook his head. Let's take a break, I need to think of something. I don't know why this is so hard for you. Ilman, we were all young, the power felt like using another limb, it was always easier than this. And I know you're strong. Seen it. Well, good for you. Kira huffed and collapsed on the grass where she was standing. He walked inside his house, clutching his forehead with one hand, clearly trying to make a better lesson plan than the one they were currently following. He's as new at this as I am. Kira thought. She let her back fall flat against the grass so she could stare up at the blue, cloudless sky. Come on, she thought, dear son, please give me the power to channel your rays through my thereby allowing me to inherit my apparent birthright and kill some vampires __love, Kira. I've officially gone insane, she while rolling over onto her side to stare at the few brown leaves dusting the ground. Autumn is a lot different in the south, a little too green for her liking. Kira wondered what it would be like to have a Christmas without snow. She would miss the New York blizzards, the slushy streets and the cursing pedestrians slipping down the subway steps or marching Prada through inches of snow. Rockefeller lit up at Christmas. The city came alive when the lights on the gigantic tree were switched on, and the ice skating rink was crowded at every hour of the day. She had always come home for a week during Christmas break, to visit with her family, but hanging ornaments on a plastic tree never felt right. Kira used to love coming home to her dorm where her roommate Sarah and her owl decorate a blue spruce pine tree. But, Kira sighed as she sat up, she had more pressing concerns. Luke said it would be easy, like breathing, eventually. She wondered if maybe it was just too late. She took psychology back at boarding and she remembered learning about human development. The first few stages of life are the most important. If you don't learn to speak by the time you're 4, you probably never will. Babies are bomb curious and learn far more than adults do. Maybe she had just missed out on her chance. Enough ruminating, Kira mentally shook herself. She needed to learn this. Luke finally re-emerged from his home and carried over 2 lemonades. Kira gladly accepted. The mix of cold and sweet instantly her, and she turned to Luke, waiting to hear his thoughts. So. Basically, you're a freak. Hey. He threw his hands up in defense. Kidding. I just don't think the way I was taught as a boy is going to do anything for you. Your body can't react, doesn't know its own. We need to awaken you first. Okay, creepy much. I just mean, we need to find some sort of trigger so you can start to remind your body how it's supposed to work. Well, how did you learn? Maybe if you tell me a little bit about the procedure, I'll understand. Luke sat down next to her on the grass, sipping his lemonade and staring deep into the ebony woods. It's hard to explain, I guess. Try. She said, not letting him off the hook at all. This was all his idea anyway. Well, not technically, but still. When you're little, the teaching is less about learning how to bring the fire out and more about learning how to stop it and control it. Ever since I can remember, I'd think of the fire and it would come. Easy as pie. The hard part is controlling it. So, it'll be doubly difficult for me. She ran a hand through her hair, exasperated. Fantastic. One of the main reasons conduit communities live in such is to protect the children who have no control. The fire doesn't hurt humans or even inanimate objects, only vampires. So, theoretically, it would safe to live anywhere. But babies just release energy all the time without any warning, and suddenly there's a streak of fire soaring through the air like a cannonball until an adult catches it and sucks it back into themselves. Obviously, if we lived in human communities, you'd stand to catch on to the strangeness. Will I ever be allowed to see that? Kira asked, vulnerable. She wished she could have grown up in such a place, totally accepted by everyone. I hope so. Sunnyville was like nothing you've ever seen. I miss it sometimes. Do you come here, Luke? Do you take on this mission? Kira had wondered it for a while. Who would willingly enroll in high school to basically babysit the one person who could destroy the world? Nobody invented that kind of pressure. Because it was my duty. That can't be the only reason. You're not one to blindly follow orders. Remember a protector in New York, and he was nothing like you. Had he said duty, I would have believed him, but you don't like to always follow the rules, you mean Sai. I spoke with him before coming here. He told me how little you knew, how you would kneel someone to look out for you. He did care about you, in his 01VN extremely stuffer way. And you pitied me. A little. Luke shrugged. He was trying to be completely honest with her. A lot of it was the fact that this was such an important duty, and important missions are hardly ever granted to someone as young as me. Pan of it was my competition _one other boy in my TOUTL, Nick, fit the bill, but he was a hard ass and no fam. I knew he'd never befriend you unless necessary. I knew he wouldn't provide the a girl your situation would need. And, you know me, he broke his far-off stare to smile at her, I can't resist a damsel in distress. He lowered his voice to spooky imitation of Dracula. Now, TTY to light me on fire if you dare, mwahaha_. Kira stood, ignoring Luke's impression of an evil mastermind, and got right back down to business. So, a trigger. Yup _ any idea what kind? Luke his head with a sly smile. He waved her closer and she hesitantly walked over while he tummed around. She moved closer to his back, wondering what the heck was going on, when he turned around and lunged at her. Luke grabbed her by the throat, knocking her to the ground, and she saw teeth protruding past his lips. He sunk his head closer, so the teeth started to poke her and Kira felt trapped. Hell, she couldn't move under the weight of his body and had no weapon to fight him off. Desperation heated her veins and she felt the flood of warmth surge through her body _ She started shivering from the temperature difference between her molten core and the breeze brushing her skin. Kira willed the fire to seep out, anything to stop the unbearable scorching off her heart. Suddenly, she burst, the same way she had in the auditorium. She felt the bum on her hand and opened her eyes despite the pain. Luke smiled and the waves of sun rocked past him, leaving him unharmed. Kira felt like a river that had just been set free from a dam. There was no way to stop the waves of power bursting forth. Control it! Luke yelled over the cackling fire. Kira told it to stop. The started slowly calming and she curved her fingers towards her palm, trapping the light in her vice-like grip. Finally, the last bit of light burned out and Kira almost expected smoke to seep from her palms instead. Luke trapped her in a hug and swung her around. That was incredible. I was even pushed back a little from your power, which is really hard to do, TMST me. You're really strong. You don't even know how strong. It's like there's no limit to how much light you can channel. I never felt it waver until you wanted it to. People usually only last for 5 or 10 minutes, maybe less at full force. Kira swiveled _ How long was I going for? Like half an hour. It was incredible _ Oh my god. Kira sat down. That felt like 30 seconds to me. It's okay, the timing will come with the control. But, for now at least, we know your trigger. She looked up at him expectantly. Well, duh. No offense, but clearly being scared is the only thing that brings the power out in you. We'll fix it. Don't worry. How? She looked up at him, noticing how the sun silhouetted his features, almost looked like he wore a golden crow I mean, I can't always run around jumping on you with fake fangs. That was just a one-time deal. You're okay, right? I got a little into the moment his eyes peered towards her throat. Kira reached her hand to her. She felt completely fine. There was no bruise even though it felt like he had choked her pretty bad. Is it possible that channeling also acts as a cure? Not that I've ever heard of. He was intrigued. She could tell I never mentioned this before, but in the auditorium, I was hit with a brick and my leg was bleeding really badly and Diana cut my face. But afterwards, when I came back to your place, all the cuts had closed. They seem to have disappeared. I just assumed it was another side effect, like the burns. Luke grabbed her shoulders, staring her down. Are you sane? She nodded. Don't tell anyone. I don't know what it means, but it is most definitely not normal. I promise, I won't tell. I don't even have anyone to tell. She shook free of his hold and tried to laugh it off. Just another way she was different, dangerous. Kira sighed. So what now? How do we keep practicing? Try to think of things that scare you, and see if anything happens. Like what? Spiders? Maybe? I don't know. This is new to me. Just try to make yourself scare to death. Kira rolled her eyes. She just had to scare the life out of herself. How simple. Kira tried thinking of spiders, but nothing happened. She thought of their hairy legs, the clicking of sharp mucus-covered fangs and sticky webs trapping her alive. Nothing. Next she thought of flying, picturing turbulence so rough her butt picked up off the seat and the overhead compartments fell open. She pictured oxygen masks falling from the ceiling, the plane spin me circles in the air to eventually crash in the Pacific Ocean where she would drown in the cockpit or escape to eaten alive by great white sharks. Not even a flush on her skin. Finally Kira thought of the worst thing, a scene out of Scream where a knife-waving psycho chased her through her house killing off her friends and popping out of closets. Nada. All Kira had managed to do was give herself the heebie-jeebies since her and Luke were totally alone in the middle of nowhere, a place no one could hear her scream. Kira shivered. This isn't working. I'm just freaking myself out. Keep trying. This has to work. It's the only way you'll learn any control and be able to do anything aside from fending off a vamp right when it's about to bite you. That meth KX1 is way risky. Suddenly, Kira had an idea. She looked back at the rock, focusing on the lines of color formed by sunlight and shadow towards the bottom. The hard surface turned black and she stared into the abyss, letting her eyes lose fuse and stand to blur, until an image from her subconscious over Diana. Kira imagined the moment when Diana leaned in to sink her teeth into Kira's flesh. The uncontrollable fear she had felt as death crept closer. How she looked at Tristan and in that moment realized he could do nothing to save her. That each of them was helpless. Kira waited for the pinprick of teeth on her, felt the tiniest pinch before. And then Kira felt it, her strength was gathering, heat flowed to her palm, and, for the first time, it felt as though she called it. She pulled at the tendrils of fire with her mind, willing them to surge through her veins, accepting the pain and on the darkness she was trying to dissipate. Kira felt a burn as the flares broke through the skin of her palm and Luke's backyard. She lost whatever hold she had had for those few seconds and started sweating under the relentless surge. Distantly, she heard a man's voice calling at her, telling her to stop, telling her to rein it in. But some son of monster had awoken inside of Kira. Like an out-of-body experience, she felt her legs give out, felt the grass cmnch against her cheek, all the while her hands aimed out towards the rook. New hands lifted her, surrounded her. Kira felt her palms press against something hard, felt the light drain away and seep into a different source. Slowly, Kira's vision began to return. She focused on her slightly glowing fingernails where they pressed up against soft cotton. Strings of light danced between her knuckles, trying to escape the suction cup hold of her hands against Luke's chest. Kira noticed for the first time that the light was sinking into him, weaving into his chest and leaving her body. Kira, you have to stop. It's much. She looked at him, at the strain on his face and the rough lines of his taut lips. Not her smiling Luke. This Luke was in pain. He squinted his eyes to squelch the feeling, trying to act like a man, but Kira could hear his raspy breath. She stepped back and folded her fingers into her palm, willing the torment to stop, and her light obeyed. I winked out almost immediately. Luke turned away and with a loud grunt, released the sunlight he had absorbed from Kira out towards the forest. For the first time, Kira understood how beautiful it was. The flames illuminated even the darkest corners of the forest, like a firework exploding at eye level. Red, yellow, orange and blue swirls circled Luke and the yard around, leaving everything unharmed. Flowers tumbled almost immediately to catch the new rays and blooms opened as if commanded. But then, Luke crashed to the ground and crumpled against the grass, letting his light wink out and leaving the yard shrouded in darkness once more. Luke! Kira screamed and ran over to him. She landed on her knees his immobile body and turned him over so his back touched the grass. She cupped his face in her hands. Luke, please, I didn't mean whatever happened. His eyes peeked out from nearly closed lids. His fingers moved against grass, inching closer to her own. Kira grabbed his hand and moved to rest his head upon her lap, brushing damp hair from his forehead. Luke! His eyes fluttered and Kira heard his breathing lengthen. Hi, he said quietly, squirming in his drowsiness. Give me a second, he asked and tried to sit up. Kira let him gather his thoughts and regain his composure, but she needed to know what had just happened. Did she almost kill him? Kira thought he had said it wasn't possible. I'm sorry, Kira said. He looked over at her and shook his head. Ivy hat, are you sorry for, Kira? It was my 01VN fault. What happened, Luke? I thought I couldn't hun you. You didn't, he sighed and tried to stand. Luke wobbled on his feet, but took a few hesitant steps, as though he were trying to remind his legs how to work. Kira followed him back to his porch and sat beside him on the stoop. I overexcited myself, Luke said finally. Kira looked at him, completely blank in.